poor single dad stole diaper from store display. What mall owner did shocked everyone on the local news? He was caught on camera stealing for his baby, humiliated, hopeless, ready to lose it all, until the woman who owned the mall walked up, looked him in the eye, and did something so unbelievable, the whole nation stopped to watch. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The December wind rattled the thin apartment windows as Ethan Miller paced back and forth, gently bouncing his crying daughter Maddie in his arm. The old heater in the corner chugged and sputtered, barely managing to keep the temperature above freezing. Yellow streetlight filtered through frost-covered windows, casting weak shadows across the worn carpet. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Daddy's got you." But the words felt hollow, even to him. Maddie's cries grew more insistent, her tiny face scrunched up in discomfort. Ethan's eyes darted to the changing table, where only one diaper remained. His throat tightened. The kitchen wasn't any more promising. Just 3 dented cans of soup lined the cabinet shelf like lonely soldiers. The formula container sat empty on the counter, a silent reminder of yet another necessity he couldn't provide. The weight of his failures pressed down on his shoulders as he continued his slow circuit around the living room. 6 months ago, he'd held his wife Sarah's hand in the delivery room, both of them full of hopes and dreams for their future family. Now those dreams lay shattered, leaving him alone with a beautiful baby girl he feared he couldn't properly care for. "Your mama would have known exactly what to do," he murmured, touching Maddie's soft cheek. The memory of Sarah's smile, so bright and full of life, twisted like a knife in his chest. The doctors had said there were complications, words like hemorrhage and "we did everything we could," blurring together in a nightmare he still couldn't fully process. His discharge papers from the army sat in a drawer, along with the final notice from Jim's auto shop. "Sorry, Miller," his boss had said, genuine regret in his voice. "These corporate cutbacks, they're hitting us all hard." The severance pay had kept them afloat for a while, but now even that lifeline had run dry. Maddie's cries subsided into hiccuping whimpers as exhaustion finally won out. Ethan carried her to the corner of the room where he'd set up her crib. Really just a pack and play they'd gotten secondhand, but he'd made it as cozy as possible with soft blankets. He laid her down gently, watching as her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her favorite yellow blanket. "Sweet dreams, little one," he whispered, running his hand over her fine baby hair. She looked so much like Sarah. The same heart-shaped face, the same determined little chin. The sight made his heart ache with equal measures of love and fear. Walking to the kitchen table, Ethan pulled out his wallet. The leather was cracked and worn, much like his spirit felt these days. Inside, a single $20 bill lay folded beside a few ones and some loose change. The car payment notice glared at him from beneath a stack of bills, topped by the landlord's final warning about the overdue rent. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Jake and Mike, army buddies who'd tried to reach out after hearing about his job loss. Good men, both of them. They'd help if he asked, he knew they would. But the thought of admitting how far he'd fallen, of becoming another burden on friends who'd already given so much in service, made his stomach turn. Ethan ran his hands over his face, feeling the rough stubble of several days without shaving. The man in the mirror these days barely resembled the confident soldier who'd once led mechanical repair units through combat zones. That man had known his purpose, had never doubted his ability to complete a mission. Now, his most important mission, caring for his daughter, seemed to be slipping through his fingers. "I'll find a way tomorrow," he whispered to the quiet room, trying to inject confidence into the words. But they echoed back hollow, like so many promises he'd made lately. Rising from the table, he walked to the window and wiped away some of the frost with his sleeve. In the distance, the Crestwood Mall's lights blazed against the dark winter sky, a beacon of warmth and commerce that seemed to mock his empty wallet and bare cupboards. Department store signs advertised holiday sales and Christmas joy, while somewhere in those buildings sat shelves stocked with everything Maddie needed: diapers, formula, warm clothes for the growing cold. The lights blurred slightly as exhaustion stung his eyes. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching his breath fog the window. Behind him, Maddie made a small sound in her sleep, and his heart clenched with fierce love and desperate determination. Tomorrow would have to bring answers. It had to. He couldn't fail her the way he'd failed at everything else. The morning sun barely penetrated the heavy gray clouds as Ethan Miller stepped out of his apartment building. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid December air. He had dressed Maddie in 3 layers: her warmest onesie, a fleece jumpsuit, and the tiny winter coat his wife had bought before. He pushed the thought away and focused on tucking the blanket tighter around his daughter in the old stroller. "There we go, sweetheart," he murmured, making sure her little hands were covered with mittens. "Nice and cozy." The stroller's right wheel squeaked with each rotation as they made their way down the cracked sidewalk. The sound drew irritated glances from other pedestrians, but Ethan couldn't afford to fix it. He couldn't afford much of anything these days. Crestwood Mall loomed ahead, its vast parking lot half empty this early in the morning. The building's beige exterior and green-tinted windows seemed less welcoming in the stark winter light. Ethan's stomach churned as they approached the automatic doors. He'd never imagined himself here like this. No shopping list, no purpose except. He swallowed hard and pushed the stroller inside. Warm air enveloped them as they entered, and Maddie cooed softly, her face pinking from the temperature change. The mall was quiet, with only a few early shoppers wandering between stores. Christmas decorations hung everywhere, garlands, twinkling lights, and a massive tree in the central courtyard. It all seemed to mock him somehow. "Just looking for sales," he whispered to himself, pushing the stroller past store windows filled with holiday displays. Nothing wrong with looking. They passed a clothing store, a bookshop, a food court where the smell of cinnamon rolls made his empty stomach growl. Ethan's hands tightened on the stroller handle as they approached the baby store. The front display window showcased everything he couldn't provide. Fresh diapers, warm clothes, new toys. The holiday sale sign seemed to shine brighter than the others, drawing his eye to the pyramid of diaper packages stacked beneath it. Maddie began to whimper, as if she too knew what they needed. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out his worn leather wallet one more time. He knew what he'd find, a single dollar bill and 84 cents in change, but he checked anyway, hoping somehow more money had materialized. It hadn't. His throat felt tight as he wheeled the stroller closer to the display. Other customers browsed nearby, but no one paid attention to the tired-looking man in the worn jacket. Ethan's military training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings. He noted the security camera's position, the distance to the exit, the location of store employees. "What am I doing?" he thought, disgusted with himself. But then Maddie's whimper turned into a cry, and he remembered the rash that had started forming from wearing her last diaper too long. He remembered the promise he'd made to his wife to take care of their baby, no matter what. His hands trembled as he picked up a package of diapers. Size 2, just right for Maddie. The plastic crinkled loudly in his ears as he carefully, slowly tucked it under the stroller's blanket, positioning it so it wouldn't be visible from the sides. "It's just this once," he told himself, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. "Just until I find work. Just to get through this week." Maddie had fallen quiet, sucking contentedly on her pacifier. She watched him with innocent eyes just like her mother's. Shame burned in his chest as he turned the stroller toward the exit. He forced himself to walk normally, not too fast, not too slow. Just another shopper heading home. The exit was maybe 30 feet away. 20. His heart pounded so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. 15 feet. 10. "Sir, wait, what's that under your stroller?" The voice cut through the ambient mall noise like a knife. Ethan froze, his back stiffening as if he'd been struck. He could feel the store employee's eyes on him, could sense other shoppers turning to look. In that moment, all his carefully constructed justifications crumbled away, leaving only the harsh reality of what he'd tried to do. Ethan's heart pounded as 2 security guards approached, their boots clicking against the polished mall floor. He instinctively pulled Maddie's stroller closer, his hands trembling as they gripped the worn handle. "Sir, please step aside," one of the guards said firmly. Maddie, sensing her father's distress, began to wail. Her cries echoed through the mall's corridor, drawing curious stares from shoppers who slowed their pace to watch the scene unfold. "I can explain," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words caught in his throat as he noticed a man in a crisp store uniform striding toward them, phone held high to record the confrontation. "I'm Rick Dalton, store manager," the man announced, his camera trained on Ethan's face. "We have you on security footage taking merchandise. The police are on their way." Ethan's chest tightened. More people were gathering now, their own phones raised like a wall of judging eyes. The stolen pack of diapers felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds beneath the stroller blanket. "Please," Ethan managed, trying to comfort his crying daughter with one hand while keeping his balance. "My little girl, she needs diapers. I lost my job, and I didn't know what else to do." Rick's lip curled. "Oh, that's rich. Playing the sympathy card? You know how many people try to scam us with sob stories?" Officer Ben Morales, the senior security guard, stepped between them. Sir, we'll need you to come with us to the security office. His tone was professional, but not unkind. My baby, Ethan pleaded, his military composure crumbling. I can't leave her. Please don't do this in front of her. Maddie's cries grew louder, her tiny face red with distress. Should have thought about that before you decided to steal, Rick said, still filming. This'll make a great example for our anti-theft campaign. The crowd had swelled to nearly 20 people now. Phones clicked and flashed. Someone whispered, "Poor baby." Another voice muttered, "Some people shouldn't be parents." Each word felt like a knife in Ethan's heart. He'd survived combat, lost his wife, endured countless struggles. But this moment, being exposed as a failure in front of his daughter, this was unbearable. "The diaper package," Officer Morales said quietly. "Please hand it over." With shaking hands, Ethan reached under the blanket and retrieved the package. As he held it out, Maddie grabbed his sleeve, her tiny fingers clutching the worn fabric of his jacket. "Look at those clothes," Rick commented, zooming his phone camera on Ethan's threadbare jacket. "Probably makes a career out of stealing." "That's not true," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I served my country. I've never stolen anything before today. I couldn't let her go without." Officer Morales gently took the package, his expression softening slightly as he noticed Ethan's military bearing despite his obvious distress. "Sir, please come with us. We'll sort this out in private." As they began to escort him toward the security office, Maddie's cries reached a fever pitch. Ethan tried to maintain his dignity, walking straight back despite the shame burning his face. But each step felt like walking through quicksand. Rick followed, narrating for his video. "As you can see, folks, this is what happens when... That's enough." A woman's voice cut through the chaos like a warm knife through butter. "Let the man speak." The crowd parted, and Ethan turned to see an elderly woman standing there. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and though she walked with a cane, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. Her eyes, kind but firm, surveyed the scene. "Mrs. Hanover," Rick stammered, quickly lowering his phone. "I was just following protocol." "I know exactly what you were doing, Mr. Dalton," Grace Hanover said, her voice carrying clearly through the now hushed corridor. She looked at Ethan, then at the crying Maddie, and her expression softened further. The owner of Crestwood Mall stepped forward, leaning slightly on her cane, and the crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. Even Maddie's cries quieted to sniffles, as if sensing a shift in the air. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small security office as Ethan Miller sat rigidly in a metal chair, his daughter Maddie whimpering softly in his arms. Officer Ben Morales stood by the door, while Rick Dalton, the store manager, kept glancing at his phone with barely concealed satisfaction. Grace Hanover settled into the chair across from Ethan, her kind eyes fixed steadily on him. "Tell me what happened," Grace said, her voice gentle but firm. Ethan swallowed hard, bouncing Maddie gently to keep her calm. His voice cracked, and he had to start again. "I lost my job at Peterson's auto shop 3 weeks ago. Budget cuts." He stroked Maddie's cheek as she grabbed his finger. "The savings are gone. I've applied everywhere, but nothing yet. This morning, we ran out of diapers." "You're her only parent?" Grace asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "My wife, Sarah." Ethan's voice grew thick. "There were complications during childbirth. She didn't make it." He looked down at Maddie, her tiny face a perfect mirror of her mother's. "It's just us now." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "You served in the military?" "Yes, ma'am. Army mechanic, 8 years. Medical discharge last year." Ethan straightened his shoulders slightly, a habit that hadn't faded with civilian life. I've never stolen anything before. He broke off, shame coloring his face. Rick Dalton stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mrs. Hanover, store policy is very clear. We need to press charges. I've already documented everything." He held up his phone proudly. Officer Morales shifted uncomfortably. "He's right about policy, ma'am, though in cases like this, not today." Grace's voice was quiet, but left no room for argument. She turned to Rick. "Delete that footage, please." Rick's face reddened. "But, Mrs. Hanover." "Now, Rick." Her tone remained gentle, but her eyes held steel. Rick's mouth opened and closed before he reluctantly began tapping at his phone. Grace reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. "How much were the diapers?" "Mrs. Hanover, you don't have to," Ethan started. $24.95, Rick muttered. Grace pulled out 3 $10 bills and handed them to Rick. "Ring them up properly, please, and get him some formula too." She turned back to Ethan. "You'll need that as well, I expect?" Ethan's eyes welled up, and he blinked hard. "I can't accept." "You can, and you will." Grace smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Sometimes we all need a little grace, Mr. Miller. That's why God gave us that word." Rick returned with a proper shopping bag containing the diapers and formula, practically dropping it on the desk before retreating to the corner. Officer Morales helped Ethan gather his things while keeping Maddie balanced. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll find a way to repay you." Grace simply nodded, holding the door open for him. As Ethan left the security office, his shoulders were bent under the weight of shame and gratitude. Later that evening, Ethan sat on his threadbare couch, Maddie finally asleep in her crib. He flicked on the small TV, hoping to distract himself from the day's humiliation. Instead, his heart stopped as he saw himself on screen. The shaky cell phone footage showed him by the store entrance, the diapers visible under the stroller blanket. The local news anchor's voice spoke over the video. A desperate scene unfolded today at Crestwood Mall, where a single father was caught stealing diapers for his infant daughter. Ethan's hands clenched as he watched the scene play out. Someone in the crowd had recorded everything: his detention, Maddie's cries, the gathering crowd. His face burned with shame as he recognized comments from onlookers. "Who steals with a baby? Some people just don't want to work." But then the footage showed Grace's arrival, her dignified presence parting the crowd. The anchor's voice continued. But this story took an unexpected turn when mall owner Grace Hanover stepped in. The scene cut to Grace being interviewed outside the mall. She stood straight-backed, her silver hair gleaming in the winter Sunday. "In times of hardship, we have two choices," she said firmly. "We can turn away, or we can extend a helping hand. That's why I've not only declined to press charges, I've offered Mr. Miller a position here at Crestwood Mall." Ethan stared at the screen, his mouth falling open. The anchor reappeared. Grace Hanover refused to press charges. Instead, she offered him a job. The incident has sparked a heated debate on social media about compassion versus accountability in our community. This is Lisa Chin, Channel 8 News. The TV droned on, moving to weather reports, but Ethan couldn't move. He looked over at Maddie's crib, where she slept peacefully, clean and fed. A job, a chance. His eyes burned with tears of shame, of gratitude, of hope as the news anchor's words echoed in his mind. She offered him a job. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot of Crestwood Mall as Ethan Miller approached the entrance, his footsteps heavy with uncertainty. In his hand, he clutched a wrinkled newspaper, his own face staring back at him from the front page. The headline made his stomach turn. "Mall owner shows mercy to desperate father." Maddie cooed softly from her stroller, bundled against the December chill in a worn blue blanket. Ethan paused at the sliding doors, his reflection fragmenting in the glass. He smoothed his jacket and ran a hand through his short brown hair, trying to look presentable despite the dark circles under his eyes. Inside, the mall was quiet, with only a few early morning walkers making their rounds. The fountain in the center court bubbled peacefully, but Ethan's cheeks burned as he passed the store where everything had happened yesterday. A few employees getting ready for opening hours stopped to stare. Following the directions he'd been given, Ethan made his way to the administrative offices on the second floor. The nameplate on the door read Grace Hanover Owner in simple gold letters. He knocked softly. "Come in," called a warm voice. Grace Hanover sat behind a desk, decorated with family photos and a small potted plant. She wore a cardigan the color of autumn leaves, and her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her eyes crinkled with kindness as she stood to greet him. "Mr. Miller, right on time," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit down." Ethan carefully positioned Maddie's stroller beside him before taking a seat. "Mrs. Hanover, I want to thank you again for yesterday. What you did," she held up a hand. "What I did was the right thing, nothing more." She settled back in her chair. "Now, about this job. We need someone part-time for maintenance work. The hours would be flexible, sweeping, basic repairs, helping elderly shoppers with their bags, that sort of thing." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want charity. And after what happened," he glanced down at the newspaper in his lap. "Mr. Miller." Grace leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Everyone deserves a second chance. You have experience as a mechanic, correct?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. 8 years in the Army, then 2 years at Peterson's Auto before the layoffs. Then you're qualified. The pay is $12 an hour to start, with a review after 90 days. She pulled out some paperwork. Unless you have a better offer elsewhere? Ethan thought of his empty kitchen cabinets, the past due notices piling up. Maddie chose that moment to wiggle in her stroller, reaching out toward Grace with a tiny hand. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I don't have any other offers." Then it's settled. Grace smiled and began explaining the paperwork. As she talked, Ethan noticed the wedding ring she still wore, though he remembered reading she was a widow. An hour later, after filling out forms and getting a brief tour, Ethan found himself in the maintenance room, being shown the cleaning supplies by Bob, the head of maintenance. The older man was gruff but professional, demonstrating how to work the floor buffer and pointing out where everything was kept. Throughout the morning, Ethan couldn't help noticing the whispers and glances from other mall employees. Two young women at the coffee kiosk turned away quickly when he walked past. Near the food court, he heard someone mutter "diaper thief" behind his back, but Ethan kept his head down and focused on his work. He swept the floors methodically, helped an elderly woman carry her shopping bags to her car, and fixed a flickering light in the west corridor. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a step toward rebuilding his dignity. During his lunch break, he sat on a bench near the playground area, feeding Maddie her bottle. The same security guard who had detained him yesterday walked past, giving him a long look. Ethan met his gaze steadily, then returned to tending his daughter. The afternoon passed in a blur of tasks. Ethan discovered he actually enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about fixing things, making them right again. When he cleaned the fingerprints off the glass barriers around the fountain, he could see his reflection becoming clear, like his own image was slowly being restored. As closing time approached, Ethan methodically mopped the floors near the central fountain. The mall was quiet now. Most shops closed, only the soft splashing of water breaking the silence. He didn't notice Grace standing near the escalator, watching him work. "You remind me of my husband," she murmured. The food court buzzed with pre-Christmas energy as Ethan wiped down tables, moving methodically from one to the next. Tinsel and wreaths decorated every corner of Crestwood Mall, and holiday music played softly through the speakers. He kept his head down, focused on his work, but he couldn't help overhearing the conversations of his co-workers at the nearby pretzel stand. "Can you believe Grace actually kept him on?" whispered Jenny, a college student who worked part-time. "I mean, he was caught stealing on camera." "My mom saw it on Facebook," replied Marcus, another employee. "Said it made the mall look bad, like we're running a charity or something." Ethan's cheeks burned, but he continued wiping tables, moving the cloth in steady circles. The smell of cleaning solution mixed with the aroma of cinnamon pretzels and coffee from nearby shops. "Well, I heard he's got a baby," Jenny added, her voice softening slightly. "Must be pretty desperate to steal diapers." "Still doesn't make it right," Marcus countered. "There are programs for people like that." Ethan moved to the next table, his movements mechanical. Maddie's face flashed in his mind, her innocent smile, her complete trust in him. The shame of that day still felt raw, but he refused to let it break him. He had a job now. He could buy diapers, formula, and even a small Christmas present for his daughter. "Good morning, everyone." Grace's warm voice cut through the whispers. She approached with her usual dignified stride, her silver hair neatly styled and a kind smile on her face. "Ethan, those tables are practically gleaming. Would you mind taking a look at the fountain next? The motor's making an odd sound." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied quietly, grateful for the change of task. "I'll check it right away." As he gathered his cleaning supplies, he heard Grace address Jenny and Marcus. "You know, when my late husband Robert first opened this mall, he believed in giving people chances, not just to shop, but to rebuild their lives. Ethan here served our country. He's a skilled mechanic and a dedicated father. I'd say that's worth more than gossip, wouldn't you?" The young employees mumbled apologetic responses, and Ethan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. At the fountain, he found the problem quickly. A piece of loose change had jammed the mechanism. As he worked to fix it, a small crowd of reporters gathered near Grace, who was giving an impromptu interview. "Mrs. Hanover, some people are calling your decision to hire Ethan Miller reckless," one reporter said, holding up a microphone. "How do you respond?" Grace stood straight, her eyes clear and determined. "Mercy isn't weakness, it's strength. When we show compassion to others, we don't diminish ourselves. We grow stronger as a community." The reporters scribbled frantically in their notepads. Ethan kept his focus on the fountain, but he couldn't help listening. "But what about the mall's reputation?" another reporter pressed. "Aren't you worried about encouraging criminal behavior?" "Criminal behavior?" Grace's voice took on a steely edge. I see a father who would do anything to care for his child. I see a veteran who served his country with honor. What I don't see is anyone asking why a man who defended our freedom can't afford basic necessities for his baby. Camera flashes lit up the area as Grace's words resonated through the mall. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he finished repairing the fountain. The water began flowing smoothly again, creating a peaceful background melody to Grace's powerful statement. Just then, a tall man in an expensive suit approached Grace, his face tight with barely contained anger. Tom Hanover, Grace's son-in-law and the mall's investment manager, pulled her aside, but his voice carried clearly. "Grace, this has got to stop," Tom hissed. "The board is concerned. You can't keep defending this criminal. It's bad for business. We've already lost 2 potential investors over this publicity stunt." Grace's response was quiet but firm. "This isn't a publicity stunt, Tom. This is about doing what's right." "What's right?" Tom's voice dripped with sarcasm. "What's right is protecting our investments. What's right is maintaining standards. You can't run a successful business by hiring criminals off the street." "I'd rather save souls than profits," Grace replied, her voice unwavering. "And if our investors can't understand that basic human dignity matters more than their bottom line, perhaps we need different investors." Tom stormed off, leaving Grace standing alone. She caught Ethan's eye and gave him a reassuring nod before walking away, her head held high. The rest of Ethan's shift passed in a blur of maintenance tasks and sidelong glances from shoppers who recognized him from the news. By closing time, his muscles ached from mopping floors and fixing broken door hinges, but it was honest work, the kind of tired that came from earning his way. When he finally returned to his apartment that evening, Mrs. Chen from next door was waiting with Maddie. The elderly woman had offered to watch her for a reasonable rate, and Ethan was grateful for her kindness. "She was very good today," Mrs. Chen said, handing Maddie over. "Such a sweet baby." Ethan thanked her and paid her from his first day's wages. Inside his apartment, he changed Maddie's diaper, store-bought this time, properly paid for, and warmed up her bottle. As he fed her, something magical happened. Maddie looked up at him and let out a bright, bubbling giggle, the first real laugh he'd heard from her in days. The sound filled the small apartment with joy, washing away the whispers and judgment of the day. Ethan held her close, breathing in her baby powder scent, knowing that every moment of humility was worth it for this. "That's my girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be okay." The early morning darkness wrapped around Crestwood Mall like a thick blanket. Ethan's boots crunched on the salt-covered sidewalk as he made his way to the employee entrance, his breath visible in the frigid December air. A string of tangled Christmas lights hung from his shoulder, and he carried a box of ornaments under one arm. He dropped Maddie off at the mall's daycare center, a benefit Grace had insisted on providing. The thought of his daughter safe and warm brought a small smile to his face as he unlocked the service door. The mall was eerily quiet at this hour, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. He'd volunteered to come in early to start the holiday decorating, partly because he needed the extra hours, but mostly because he wanted to prove himself useful. "Good morning, Ethan," Grace's warm voice called out. He turned to see her approaching, carrying 2 steaming paper cups. "I thought you might need this." She handed him one of the coffees. "Mrs. Hanover, you didn't have to." "Grace," she corrected gently. "And yes, I did. It's freezing out there." She gestured to a nearby bench. "Take a break before you start. These old bones need to rest a minute anyway." Ethan hesitated, then sat beside her. The coffee warmed his hands through the paper cup. "My Robert used to love this time of year," Grace said softly, her eyes distant. "He'd spend hours putting up lights, even after he came back from Vietnam. Said it helped him remember there was still beauty in the world." Ethan's hands tightened around his cup. "Was he? Was it hard for him, coming back?" Grace nodded slowly. "The war changed him. He was quieter, more careful, but he never lost his kindness." She turned to look at Ethan. "You remind me of him, you know, that same quiet strength." Ethan stared down at his coffee. "I don't feel very strong most days." That's exactly what Robert would say. Grace's voice grew warmer. He found his purpose helping others, veterans like himself who were struggling. It gave him back his pride. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "Which is why I wanted to talk to you about this." She opened it, revealing some roughly sketched plans. "I've been thinking about starting something here at the mall. A second chances program." Ethan leaned in to look at the papers. Grace continued. "The idea is to create jobs for people who need them, most veterans, single parents, anyone trying to rebuild their lives. Not just maintenance work, but retail positions, security, customer service. Like what you did for me, Ethan said quietly. Exactly. Grace's eyes sparkled. But bigger. A real program, with training and support. The mall has space we're not using, resources we could redirect. She paused. I'd like you to help me design it, Ethan. You know better than anyone what people in these situations really need. Ethan sat back, overwhelmed. Me? But you're exactly who I need, Grace interrupted firmly. You understand both sides now, the struggle and the path forward. She touched his arm gently. Will you help me? Ethan looked at the papers, then at Grace's hopeful face. He thought about that desperate night when he'd stolen the diapers, how close he'd come to losing everything. He thought about other veterans he knew, other single parents struggling to make ends meet. Yes, he said, his voice stronger than he expected. Yes, I'll help. Grace's face lit up. Wonderful. Now, let's get these decorations up before the shops open. She stood, moving with surprising agility for her age. Where should we start? They spent the next hour hanging lights and garland, Grace directing from below while Ethan climbed the ladder. As they worked, she told stories about Robert, how he'd taught high school shop class after the war, always taking extra time with troubled students, believing everyone deserved a chance to prove themselves. He would have liked you, Grace said, passing up another string of lights. He always said you could tell a person's character by how they handle their lowest moments. Ethan thought about that as he secured the lights. I didn't handle mine very well. You did exactly what a loving father would do, Grace countered. And look how you've handled everything since. Robert would have respected that. They finished the main entrance just as the sun began to rise, its pale light filtering through the glass doors. Ethan stepped back to check their work, catching his reflection in the glass. He barely recognized himself. Clean uniform, pressed and neat, standing tall instead of hunched with shame. There was something different in his eyes, too. Something that looked almost like hope. Perfect timing, Grace said, admiring the twinkling lights. The mall opens in an hour. Why don't you grab some breakfast before your shift starts? My treat. But Ethan shook his head. Actually, if it's okay, I'd like to look at those program plans some more. Maybe we could start mapping out what kind of positions we might need? Grace smiled, her eyes misty. Of course. Let's go to my office. She picked up her empty coffee cup. You know, Ethan, sometimes God's greatest gifts come wrapped in our darkest moments. They walked together through the quiet mall, their footsteps echoing in harmony. As the Christmas lights twinkled softly behind them, the morning sun filtered through Crestwood Mall's skylight, casting warm patches on the newly hung flyers. Second Chances program. Because everyone deserves another shot, read the bold letters across the top. Ethan Miller stood back, adjusting one that hung slightly crooked. His reflection in the polished window showed a different man than just a week ago. His uniform was crisp, his posture straighter. Looking good, Mr. Miller, Grace called out as she approached, her sensible shoes clicking against the tile floor. Behind her walked a young woman with a reporter's notebook tucked under her arm. Her sharp eyes took in everything, including the way Ethan immediately straightened his name badge. Ethan, I'd like you to meet my granddaughter, Lila Hanover. Grace's voice carried warmth, but Lila's professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Nice to meet you, ma'am, Ethan said, extending his hand. Lila shook it briefly. So you're the one from the viral video? It wasn't quite a question. Ethan's cheeks flushed, but he held her gaze. Yes, that was me. Lila's gonna document our Second Chances program, Grace explained, placing a gentle hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. She works for the Chronicle. I want to see if this program is actually helping people, Lila said, pulling out her notebook. Or if it's just good PR for the mall. Grace shot her granddaughter a disapproving look, but Ethan just nodded. Would you like to see what we've done with the storage spaces? He offered. They walked together to the mall's back corridors. Ethan pushed open a heavy door to reveal a formerly cluttered storage room, now transformed into a bright break room. Fresh paint covered the walls, and donated furniture created comfortable seating areas. I fixed the lighting myself, Ethan explained, flipping switches to demonstrate. And we've got a microwave and coffee maker for breaks. His voice carried quiet pride. Lila scribbled in her notebook. And who's paying for all this? The mall covers the basic supplies, Grace answered. But most of the furniture was donated by local businesses. Ethan's been coordinating everything, along with the regular maintenance work. Lila's eyebrow arched. Yes, ma'am. I come in early to work on this. Ethan gestured to a bulletin board where several applications were already pinned. We've got 5 veterans interested in starting next week. As they continued the tour, Lila peppered Ethan with questions about his background, his military service, and the incident that brought him here. He answered each one honestly but briefly, never making excuses. "And you're comfortable being the face of this program?" Lila asked, her pen poised. "Given how you ended up here, I'm not proud of what I did," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But if my story helps others find help before they get that desperate, then maybe some good can come from it." Throughout the day, Lila followed Ethan as he worked. She watched him fix a broken escalator, help an elderly woman find her car in the parking lot, and coordinate with local businesses about job placements. He moved with purpose, treating everyone with the same quiet respect. As evening approached, the food court began closing down. Ethan noticed a man in a worn military jacket sitting alone on a bench, his shoulders hunched against the world. Without hesitation, Ethan approached the restaurant managers who were cleaning up. "Mind if I take those leftover sandwiches?" he asked quietly. "They'll just go to waste otherwise." The manager nodded, and Ethan carefully wrapped several sandwiches and napkins. Lila, pretending to check her phone nearby, observed as Ethan walked over to the veteran. "Rough day?" Ethan asked, sitting down beside the man. The veteran tensed initially, but relaxed when he spotted Ethan's maintenance uniform. "You could say that." "I've got some extra food here," Ethan said casually, offering the sandwiches. "Can't let it go to waste." The veteran hesitated, pride warring with hunger in his eyes, a look Ethan knew all too well. "You sure?" "Absolutely. I was Army myself, 3rd Infantry Division." A ghost of a smile crossed the veteran's face. "Marines, 2 tours." "Thank you for your service," Ethan said simply, standing up. "And hey, if you're interested in work, we're starting a new program here." He pulled a flyer from his pocket and laid it next to the sandwiches. "No pressure, just think about it." The veteran nodded gratefully, and Ethan walked away, giving the man his dignity. As he turned the corner, he didn't notice Lila quickly tucking her notebook away, her earlier skepticism softening at the genuine kindness she'd witnessed. The interaction lasted barely 5 minutes, but it spoke volumes. There had been no cameras, no audience, no one to impress, just one man helping another because he could. Ethan sat across from Lila in the cramped maintenance office, his work-worn hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee. The morning light filtered through the small window, casting shadows across the desk between them. Lila's recorder blinked red as she leaned forward, her notebook open and ready. "So, tell me about Sarah," Lila said softly, mentioning his late wife's name. "Only if you're comfortable, of course." Ethan's fingers tightened around the cup. He hadn't spoken about Sarah to anyone since the funeral. She was. He paused, searching for words. "She loved to dance. Even when there wasn't any music playing, she'd just grab my hand and start swaying in the kitchen." Lila smiled, jotting notes. "How did you meet?" "At the VA hospital. She was a nurse there." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I came in for a checkup after my discharge, and she told me I had the worst handwriting she'd ever seen on the forms. Made me fill them out again." The maintenance office hummed with the sound of the old heater. Through the door, they could hear the early morning bustle of the mall coming to life. Security gates rolling up, coffee machines whirring at the cafe next door. "She was so excited about the baby," Ethan continued, his voice growing quieter. "We'd tried for 2 years when it finally happened." He set down his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. "The doctor said there were complications. She made me promise to take care of our little girl, no matter what." Lila put down her pen, touched by the raw pain in his voice. "It wasn't your fault, Ethan. I should have done something. Found better doctors. Noticed something was wrong sooner." His eyes grew distant. "Now I can barely keep Maddie in diapers. Some days, I wonder if Sarah would be disappointed in me." From the doorway came Grace's gentle voice. "I think she'd be very proud of you, Mr. Miller." They turned to see Grace standing there, holding a box of Christmas decorations. She set it down and smiled warmly. "Sorry to interrupt. The new hires are here for orientation." Ethan quickly wiped his eyes and stood up. Through the office window, they could see a small group gathering in the corridor, a middle-aged woman in a worn coat, an elderly veteran using a cane, and a young man with tattoos peeking above his collar. "Our first batch of second chancers," Grace said proudly. "Would you mind showing them around, Ethan? You know this place better than anyone now." Ethan nodded, grateful for the distraction. As he headed for the door, Lila called out, "Wait, can we finish the interview later?" "Sure," he said. I'll be here. Throughout the day, Lila watched Ethan interact with the new hires. He showed them how to operate the floor buffer, where to find cleaning supplies, and which store owners preferred their windows cleaned in a specific way. His patience never wavered, even when explaining things multiple times. The elderly veteran, who introduced himself as Frank, struggled with the mop bucket's wheels. Without making a fuss, Ethan quietly fixed them during lunch break. The young man with tattoos, Marcus, seemed defensive at first, but slowly relaxed, as Ethan taught him how to repair simple electrical fixtures. Grace observed it all from her usual bench near the fountain, smiling like a proud mother. When Lila sat beside her grandmother, Grace said, "You see it now, don't you? Why I believed in him." Lila nodded, reviewing her notes. "He's different than I expected. When I first saw that viral video, I thought this was just another social media stunt. Sometimes the best stories aren't about what makes headlines," Grace replied. "They're about what happens after the cameras stop rolling." As evening approached, the mall grew quieter. The new employees left for the day, each looking a little straighter, a little more hopeful than when they'd arrived. Lila found Ethan cleaning up in the food court. "Coffee?" she offered, holding out a cup from the cafe. "I thought we could finish our talk." They sat at a corner table, watching snow fall through the glass ceiling panels above. The Christmas lights strung around the food court cast a warm glow over everything. "Thank you," Ethan said suddenly. "For what?" "For listening. For not making the story about." He gestured vaguely. "You know, poor Dad steals diapers. It's more than that." "It is," Lila agreed. "It's about second chances, about people helping people." She closed her notebook. "About how sometimes the worst moment in your life can lead to something good." Ethan looked up at the falling snow, thinking of Sarah. "She would have loved this place," he said softly, "especially at Christmas." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow gather on the glass ceiling while their coffee grew cold. The morning sun streamed through the mall's glass ceiling, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Ethan pushed his cleaning cart past the fountain, where a small crowd had gathered around one of the mounted TVs in the electronics store display. His heart skipped a beat when he saw his own face on the screen. "That's him," whispered a teenage girl to her friend. "The diaper guy." Ethan kept his head down, but he couldn't help overhearing the news report. In a remarkable turn of events, the anchor was saying, "Crestwood Mall's Second Chances initiative has become a beacon of hope for struggling members of our community. What started with one desperate father's attempt to steal diapers has blossomed into something extraordinary." The camera cut to footage of Lila interviewing various program participants. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, a single mother who now managed the food court, Jim, a Vietnam veteran who worked as a security guard, and Kevin, a former inmate who had become one of their best maintenance workers. "I never thought anyone would give me another shot," Kevin said on screen, his eyes glistening. "But Mrs. Hanover and Ethan, they saw past my mistakes." Ethan's throat tightened. He remembered the day they'd hired Kevin, how the young man's hands had trembled as he filled out his application. The report continued playing as Ethan worked. Lila's voice carried through the mall speakers. "What we're witnessing here isn't just charity, it's a revolution in compassion. These aren't handouts, they're opportunities for dignity." "Did you see the online comments?" A sharp voice cut through Ethan's thoughts. He glanced up to see Tom Hanover striding past, phone in hand, talking to someone on his Bluetooth earpiece. "It's trending nationwide. My mother-in-law's turned this place into a halfway house for criminals and deadbeats." Ethan's grip tightened on his mop handle, but he kept working. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Later that morning, Grace called a meeting with her investors. Ethan was mopping near her office when the men in suits arrived, their faces stern and disapproving. Through the glass walls, he could see them gesturing at tablets and phones, probably showing declining numbers and negative feedback. "The liability issues alone are staggering," one man's voice carried through the door. "You've got ex-cons handling money, for heaven's sake!" "And what about our image?" another demanded. "High-end retailers are threatening to pull out. This isn't a charity, Mrs. Hanover, it's a business." Grace sat calmly at her desk, her silver hair catching the morning light. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "do you know what my husband used to say about money?" The investors exchanged glances. "He said it's like manure. It only does good if you spread it around to help things grow." She smiled at their shocked expressions. "Yes, our profits might dip. Yes, some people might shop elsewhere. But if we lose money and gain compassion, we've won more than enough." Tom burst into the office, waving his phone. "Have you seen these comments? People are calling us naive, saying we're enabling criminals. Our stock is down 12%. Tom, Grace said firmly. Some things matter more than stock prices. This is insane. Tom's face reddened. You're throwing away everything Dad built. And for what? Some feel-good story about second chances? Ethan moved his cart further down the hall, but he couldn't escape Tom's rising voice. That Miller guy, he's probably laughing at us. One little sob story about his dead wife and his baby, and you hand him the keys to the kingdom. That's enough. Grace's voice carried an authority Ethan had never heard before. You didn't know your father-in-law as well as you think, Tom. He believed in people, all people, even the ones who made mistakes. Well, your bleeding heart is going to bankrupt us, Tom spat. And when it does, don't come crying to me. The door slammed as Tom stormed out, nearly knocking over Ethan's cart. He didn't even glance at Ethan as he passed, too angry to notice the man he'd just insulted. Through the glass, Ethan could see Grace sitting quietly, her hands folded on her desk. The investors shuffled uncomfortably. Mrs. Hanover, one began gently. We understand your intentions, but my intentions, Grace interrupted, are to run this mall the way my husband would have wanted. If you gentlemen can't support that, you're welcome to invest elsewhere. One by one, the men filed out, murmuring among themselves. Ethan pretended to be absorbed in his work, but his mind was racing. All this trouble because of him, because Grace had chosen to show him mercy that day. He watched through the glass as Grace removed her reading glasses and wiped her eyes. For the first time, she looked tired, vulnerable. This woman who had given him everything was now risking everything. Her reputation, her business, her family's legacy. Ethan's jaw clenched as he pushed his cart toward the maintenance room. He wouldn't let her down. He would work harder, longer, better. He would prove to everyone, especially Tom Hanover, that Grace's faith in him wasn't misplaced. He caught his reflection in a store window, no longer the desperate man who had stolen diapers, but someone with purpose, with dignity, someone worthy of the second chance he'd been given. In the distance, he could hear the fountain's steady splash, like a heartbeat at the center of the mall. Somewhere above, sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, touching everything with gold, even the places that had been in shadow just moments before. Paint dripped from rollers in gentle swooshes as morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of the old mall office. The scent of fresh paint mixed with coffee and donuts filled the air. Ethan Miller stood on a stepladder, carefully cutting in along the ceiling with a steady hand, while around him, the other members of the Second Chances program transformed the space with broad strokes of warm beige. "Hey Miller," called Marcus, a former Marine who'd been homeless until Grace hired him last week. "Think fast." He tossed Ethan a jelly donut wrapped in a napkin. Ethan caught it one-handed, earning a round of appreciative chuckles from the crew. "Thanks, but you're supposed to eat those, not throw them," he said with a grin. "Once a Marine, always a Marine," Marcus shot back. "Everything's target practice." Sarah, a single mom who'd recently started as a mall custodian, rolled her eyes as she dipped her roller in paint. "Boys and their games. Some of us are trying to work here." Lila Hanover moved through the scene with her camera, capturing the easy banter and teamwork. She paused to focus on Jenny, an elderly veteran carefully painting baseboards, her aged hands steady with purpose. "Tell me how it feels to be part of this program," Lila prompted gently. Jenny looked up, her eyes bright. "Honey, at my age, most people think you're done, ready for the shelf. But Grace?" She saw I still had something to give. She gestured at the transforming room. "This isn't just paint on walls. It's dignity coming back to life." Ethan watched the interview from his perch, his heart warming at Jenny's words. He remembered his own first days here, shoulders hunched with shame, expecting judgment around every corner. Now, barely 2 months later, he stood tall among people who'd become more than co-workers. Grace appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of fresh coffee. "My goodness," she exclaimed. "I leave for an hour and you've already gotten so much done." Her face glowed with pride as she set down the tray on a protected table. "We aim to please, ma'am," Marcus said, executing a playful salute that made Grace laugh. "This room is going to be beautiful," she said, running her hand along a freshly painted wall. "A proper place for all of you to gather, plan events, or just rest between shifts." Lila turned her camera to capture her grandmother's expression. "What made you think of converting this old office into a community space?" Grace's eyes twinkled. "Well, when you have treasure, you need a proper chest to keep it in. And these people?" She gestured to the workers. "They're the real treasure of Crestwood Mall. The afternoon progressed with steady work punctuated by stories and laughter. Old Jim, a veteran who'd struggled with PTSD until Grace gave him a chance as a security guard, regaled them with tales from his Army days. Sarah shared pictures of her kids, while Marcus taught them all an old Marine Corps cadence that soon had everyone chanting as they worked. Ethan moved among them, offering tips on painting technique, sharing his own stories, and feeling the wonderful weight of belonging settle over him. He caught Lila watching him through her camera lens and gave her a genuine smile, something that would have been impossible just weeks ago. "You're different now," Lila observed during a break, lowering her camera. "When I first met you, I was a mess," Ethan finished for her, "scared of my own shadow. And now?" He looked around at the others, at the way they worked together with easy familiarity. "Now I remember what it's like to be part of something bigger than myself." Grace overheard and touched his shoulder gently. "You were always part of something bigger, Ethan. You just needed reminding." As the day wore on, the old office transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new curtains softened the windows, and donated furniture created cozy conversation areas. But more striking than the physical changes was the transformation in the workers themselves. Marcus stood straighter, his old military bearing returning. Sarah laughed more freely, her face relaxed. Jenny moved with renewed energy, as if each brushstroke was washing away years of isolation, and Ethan felt the last remnants of his shame dissolving in the warmth of shared purpose. Late afternoon, sun painted golden stripes across the newly finished walls. The crew stood back, admiring their work with paint-speckled clothes and satisfied smiles. "Tomorrow we'll bring in the furniture," Grace announced. "But for now, I think you've all earned an early night. Go home to your families." As they cleaned up, Lila reviewed footage on her camera. "This is going to make a beautiful segment," she said softly. "Real people, real change." Ethan gathered his things, his heart full. The day's work had left him tired but energized in a way he hadn't felt since before losing his wife. He said his goodbyes, accepting backslaps and see you tomorrows from his newfound family. The drive home was quiet, streetlights coming on as dusk settled over Crestwood. Mrs. Martinez, his elderly neighbor who watched Maddie during his shifts, met him at the door with a sleeping baby in her arms. "She was an angel today," Mrs. Martinez whispered, carefully transferring Maddie to his embrace. In the nursery, Ethan held his daughter close, breathing in her sweet baby scent. Paint still clung to his clothes, but he didn't mind. He gently rocked Maddie, remembering the day's moments of connection and purpose. "Daddy's doing something good, sweetheart," he whispered to his sleeping daughter. Snowflakes danced outside the towering glass windows of Crestwood Mall as Ethan adjusted another strand of twinkling lights. The main atrium had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with evergreen garlands draping the railings and red velvet bows adorning every pillar. A massive Christmas tree, stretching 3 stories high, dominated the center, its ornaments catching and reflecting the warm glow of thousands of tiny bulbs. A little higher on the left, Grace called out from below, her silver hair neatly styled and a festive red sweater brightening her usual conservative attire. She clutched a clipboard, checking off items from her extensive list for the Gifts of Grace charity event. Ethan shifted the lights, his movements careful and precise. "How's that?" "Perfect," Grace smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You've got quite an eye for detail, Ethan." He climbed down from the ladder, wiping his hands on his uniform. "Learned that in the Army. Every little thing matters." Around them, the mall hummed with activity. Veterans in pressed shirts and slacks arranged wrapped presents under the tree, while single parents set up refreshment tables with cookies and hot chocolate. The community room, once just a dusty storage space, now served as Santa's workshop, where volunteers wrapped last-minute donations. "Can you believe it?" Grace gestured to the growing crowd of early arrivals. 6 months ago, this was just an idea on paper." Ethan watched a former Army buddy, now part of the Second Chances program, help a little girl hang an ornament on a smaller tree. "Sometimes I still can't believe any of this is real." Lila appeared, carrying her camera equipment, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Everything's ready for the presentation," she said, smiling warmly at Ethan. "The local news crew is setting up now." "Presentation?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "I thought they were just doing a general piece about the charity drive." Grace and Lila exchanged knowing looks. "There might be a little surprise planned," Grace said innocently. Before Ethan could probe further, the children's choir from Crestwood Elementary began assembling near the tree, their small voices lifted in silent night, drawing shoppers and event attendees alike toward the center of the mall. Parents pulled out phones to record, and even the usually hurried store employees paused to listen. The atrium filled quickly. Families clustered around the tree, elderly couples found seats on benches, and a group of veterans stood tall and proud near the refreshment tables. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter, punctuated by the delighted squeals of children. Grace stepped up to the microphone, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Welcome everyone to our first annual Gifts of Grace charity event." Her voice carried clearly through the space. "Tonight, we celebrate something more precious than presents. We celebrate second chances and the power of compassion." The crowd applauded warmly. Ethan stood to the side, holding Maddie, who wore a tiny red dress with white ribbons. She babbled happily, reaching for the sparkling lights above. 6 months ago, Grace continued, a single moment changed everything. One act of desperation became an opportunity for transformation. Since then, our Second Chances program has employed 35 people, all of whom are here tonight, giving back to their community. More applause. Stronger this time. Ethan felt his cheeks warm as several people glanced his way. "And now," Grace said, "I'd like to introduce my granddaughter, Lila Hanover, who has documented this journey from the beginning." Lila took the microphone, her professional demeanor softened by genuine emotion. "When I first heard about second chances, I was skeptical. In my line of work, you learn to question everything." She paused, meeting Ethan's eyes. "But sometimes, the best stories are the ones that remind us to believe in people again." She reached for something behind the podium, a small crystal award. "Ethan Miller," she called out. "Would you please join me?" The crowd parted as Ethan, still holding Maddie, made his way forward. His heart hammered in his chest. For outstanding community leadership and embodying the spirit of hope, Lila read from the plaque, "We present this award to Ethan Miller, whose courage to accept help inspired others to both give and receive it." The applause was deafening. Maddie clapped too, mimicking the crowd. Ethan carefully shifted his daughter to one arm so he could accept the award with the other. Standing at the microphone, looking out at the sea of familiar faces, people whose stories now intertwined with his own, Ethan felt a surge of emotion. He cleared his throat. I didn't prepare anything," he began, his voice rough with feeling. 6 months ago, I stood in this mall making the worst decision of my life. I was broke, desperate, and too proud to ask for help." He glanced down at Maddie, who reached up to pat his cheek. "But sometimes our lowest moments become turning points. One act of kindness saved me, and it can save anyone." He looked at Grace, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Mrs. Hanover didn't just give me a job. She gave me back my dignity. She showed me that second chances aren't just about forgiveness. They're about believing people can be more than their worst mistakes." The crowd had grown completely silent, hanging on his words. "Look around," Ethan continued, gesturing to his fellow program participants. "Every person here has a story. Every one of us has known darkness, but tonight we stand in the light. Tonight we're not just receiving, we're giving back. And that's the real miracle of second chances." The applause that followed felt like a wave, washing through the atrium. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some of the veterans wiped at their eyes. Parents hugged their children closer. Grace made her way to Ethan's side, her eyes shining with tears. As the applause continued to fill the air, she reached up to squeeze his arm. "That's my Christmas miracle," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The morning after Christmas brought no peace to Crestwood Mall. Instead of the usual quiet buzz of post-holiday shopping, chaos erupted in the PR office. Phones rang non-stop, their shrill tones cutting through the tense atmosphere like sirens. Sandra, the PR assistant, juggled 3 calls at once, her face growing paler by the minute. "Yes, ma'am. I understand your concern." "No, sir. We can't comment at this time. Please direct your questions to our Media Relations Department." On every computer screen, social media feeds exploded with the same viral video, grainy security footage of Ethan's desperate attempt to steal diapers 2 months ago. But this version had been carefully edited, cutting out crucial moments and making Grace's intervention appear calculated rather than compassionate. "Look at this," muttered one security guard to another, pointing at his phone. "They're saying she planned it all along, some kind of publicity stunt to boost holiday sales." The accusations spread like wildfire. Local news stations parked their vans outside, reporters clutching microphones and waiting for comments. Inside Grace's office, the atmosphere was suffocating. "This is a disaster," Tom Hanover declared, pacing back and forth across Grace's Persian rug. His expensive suit seemed at odds with the wholesome Christmas decorations still adorning the walls. The investors are in an uproar. 3 major retailers are threatening to pull out. Grace sat behind her desk, looking smaller than usual, but maintaining her dignity. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. The video has been manipulated, Tom. Anyone who knows me, what people know doesn't matter. Tom's fist came down hard on her desk. It's what they believe. And right now, they believe you orchestrated this whole thing. Outside the office, Ethan stood frozen by the maintenance closet, a mop forgotten in his hands. Every passing shopper seemed to stare, whisper, point. The morning news played on the television at the electronics store. Questions arise about Crestwood Mall's Christmas miracle, as new footage suggests orchestrated deception. Lila burst through the mall entrance, her journalist notebook clutched tightly in her hand. She'd spent the morning making calls, checking sources. Something about this didn't add up. The timing was too perfect, the editing too precise. "Ethan!" she called out, hurrying toward him. "This isn't right. Someone had to have access to the original footage to edit it like this. I'm going to." But before she could finish, Tom emerged from Grace's office, flanked by 2 security guards and the mall's head of operations. His face wore an expression of manufactured concern. "Mr. Miller," Tom announced loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "In light of recent developments and to protect the reputation of Crestwood Mall, we're terminating your employment effective immediately." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. Around him, people stopped to watch, phones recording the moment. He thought of Maddie at daycare, of the rent he'd finally caught up on, of the pride he'd started to rebuild. "But I didn't." He started, then stopped. What could he say? The truth was, he had tried to steal those diapers. Grace's kindness had given him a second chance. And now, that kindness was being twisted into something ugly. "Please escort Mr. Miller to his locker," Tom instructed the security guards. "Make sure he returns his keys and badge." Lila stepped forward. "This is wrong. You can't." "Miss Hanover," Tom cut her off smoothly. "As a journalist, surely you understand the need for transparency and accountability. We're simply doing what's best for the mall." Grace appeared in her office doorway, face pale but composed. "Tom, stop this. You have no authority to—" "Actually," Tom produced a document from his briefcase. "The board has voted to temporarily relieve you of your duties pending an investigation. For your own good, Grace. The stress clearly hasn't been good for you." Ethan watched Grace's face crumple for just a moment before she gathered herself. Their eyes met across the atrium, and he saw all the apologies she couldn't speak aloud. The security guards moved forward, one on each side of Ethan. "Sir, please come with us." Ethan handed the mop to a nearby maintenance worker. With quiet dignity, he walked toward the employee lockers, passing the Christmas tree, where just 2 days ago, he'd received an award for leadership. The ornaments seemed to mock him now. The locker room was cold and empty. Ethan opened his locker slowly, removing the few personal items he'd accumulated. A photo of Maddie, a spare tie Grace had given him, a Christmas card from the other Second Chances employees. Above him, the fluorescent lights flickered and dimmed the automatic system shutting down for the evening. In the growing darkness, he carefully folded his uniform and placed it on the bench. His maintenance keys made a final metallic clink as he set them down. The security guards waited by the door, their faces uncomfortable but determined. Through the walls, Ethan could hear the mall's closing announcements, the same ones he'd helped repair the speaker system for just weeks ago. One by one, the mall lights shut off in their program sequence. Each darkening section marked another piece of his shattered new life. He closed the locker door with a soft click that echoed in the empty room. In the shadows, Ethan straightened his shoulders and walked toward the exit, just as he'd done that first desperate day with the diapers. But this time, instead of Grace's mercy waiting for him, there was only the cold winter night ahead. The evening shadows stretched across Ethan's small apartment as he gently rocked Maddie in the old wooden chair his wife had loved so much. Bills covered the coffee table like fallen autumn leaves, each one stamped with bold red letters demanding payment. The electricity notice, the car payment, the new rent increase. They blurred together in the dim light, a mountain of paper worries that seemed to grow taller by the day. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart," he whispered as Maddie fussed against his shoulder. Her tiny fingers clutched at his worn t-shirt, and he breathed in her sweet baby smell, trying to find comfort in it like he used to. But tonight, even that brought a sharp ache to his chest. Everything he'd built up over the past weeks, his dignity, His hope, his chance at a fresh start, had crumbled away like sand castles at high tide. The mall maintenance uniform still hung on the back of his door, a reminder of what he'd lost. He couldn't bring himself to take it down yet. The fabric still smelled faintly of floor cleaner and coffee from the food court. Familiar scents that now felt like they belonged to another life entirely. Maddie whimpered, and Ethan adjusted her position, patting her back in slow circles. I know, baby girl. Daddy knows. His voice cracked slightly. We'll figure something out. We always do. A gentle knock at the door made him freeze. For a moment, he considered pretending not to be home. He couldn't face any more sympathetic neighbors or judgment-filled stares. But then he heard Grace's voice, soft but clear. Ethan, it's Grace Hanover. Please, may I come in? His shoulders slumped. He couldn't turn her away, not after everything. It's open, he called quietly, not wanting to disturb Maddie, who was finally starting to drift off. Grace entered, followed by Lila. Both women's faces showed the strain of the past few days. But Grace's eyes still held that unwavering kindness that had first given him hope. She was wearing her usual cardigan, though without the mall owner's badge, she'd always carried with pride. Oh, look at this sweet angel, Grace whispered, smiling at Maddie's sleeping form. She settled carefully onto the worn couch, while Lila remained standing, her reporter's notebook clutched tightly in her hands. I'm so sorry, Ethan began, but Grace held up a hand to stop him. Don't you dare apologize, she said firmly. None of this is your fault. Tom's been looking for an excuse to push me out for months. He never did approve of running the mall with heart instead of just spreadsheets. Ethan shifted Maddie to his other shoulder, guilt weighing heavy in his chest. But if you hadn't needed help that day, I would never have had the chance to do what was right, Grace interrupted. And I'd rather lose my position than lose my purpose. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. The world can be cruel, Ethan. Lord knows I've seen enough of that. But goodness doesn't depend on their approval. Lila stepped forward, her professional demeanor softening as she watched Maddie sleep. And we're not giving up, she added. That edited video? The timing's too perfect. I'm going to find out who really posted it and why. There's more to this story, and I'm going to uncover the truth. I've already lost everything once, Ethan said quietly, thinking of his wife, of the life they'd planned together. I thought I was getting back on my feet, but maybe I was fooling myself. Grace stood and crossed the room, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You haven't lost everything, she said softly. You have that precious girl in your arms. You have your integrity, and you have friends who believe in you. Ethan looked down at Maddie's peaceful face, her tiny eyelashes fluttering as she dreamed. His heart swelled with love, even as it ached with uncertainty. We can fight this, Lila insisted, her reporter's determination showing through. The community rallied behind you before. They will again, once they know the truth. Ethan managed a small, grateful smile, but his mind was already made up. He couldn't put Grace through any more trouble, couldn't risk Maddie's future on the chance of clearing his name. As soon as the winter storm warning lifted and the roads cleared, they would leave. Start fresh somewhere else, somewhere their past couldn't follow them. Thank you, he said simply, meeting Grace's understanding gaze. Both of you, for everything. Grace squeezed his shoulder once more before stepping back. The old teacher's wisdom in her eyes told him she sensed his intentions, but she didn't push. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small stuffed bear. For Maddie, she said, every child needs something to hold on to when times get hard. Ethan took the bear with his free hand, his throat tight with emotion. I don't deserve your kindness. Kindness isn't about deserving, Grace replied. It's about believing in better things to come. They said their goodbyes quietly, careful not to wake Maddie. As the door closed behind them, Ethan stood at the window, watching the snow continue to fall. He placed the stuffed bear in Maddie's crib and returned to his bills, his mind already calculating how far they could get on what little savings he had left. The snow would clear soon enough, and with it, their chance to start over. But for now, in the quiet of their small apartment, he held his daughter close and let himself remember the brief time when kindness had seemed stronger than judgment and hope had felt like more than just a dream. The morning air bit through Ethan's worn jacket as he carried the last box to his rusty sedan. Frost covered the windshield like delicate lace, beautiful but bitter, much like the memories he was leaving behind. Maddie slept peacefully in her car seat, bundled in the warmest blanket he owned, her tiny breaths creating small clouds in the cold air. He stood for a moment, looking up at their apartment building. The peeling paint and cracked windows somehow seemed less depressing now that he was leaving. At least here, they'd had a roof over their heads. At least here, for a brief moment, they'd found hope. "Time to go, sweetheart," he whispered to Maddie, closing the car door as gently as possible to avoid waking her. The engine sputtered to life on the third try, and the heater wheezed out lukewarm air. As he pulled away from the curb, the town of Crestwood began to wake up. Store lights flickered on, and early morning workers scraped ice from their windshields. The mall loomed in his rearview mirror, its massive structure casting long shadows in the rising Sunday. Ethan forced himself not to look back, but his mind wandered there anyway. The fields stretching beside the highway were frozen solid, brown grass poking through patches of snow like stubble on an old man's face. He drove without direction, taking random turns when he reached intersections, as if somehow the road itself might show him where to go. Grace's words echoed in his head. "We don't give up when the story turns dark. That's when faith does its best work." But what did faith matter when all it brought was pain to others? He brought scandal to Grace's door, shame to her family's name, and chaos to a community that had been peaceful before he arrived. The gas gauge needle dipped toward empty, forcing him to pull into a small station on the outskirts of town. As he filled the tank, his breath creating clouds in the frigid air, movement from inside the station's convenience store caught his eye. A small TV mounted near the ceiling was playing the morning news. Through the window, he could see the headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen. "Community outraged, Grace Hanover steps down." His hands began to shake, and he nearly dropped the gas nozzle. Inside the store, customers gathered around the TV, shaking their heads and talking in animated gestures. Ethan paid quickly with his last $20 and slipped back into the car before anyone could recognize him. His chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing his heart in a vice. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, trying to steady his trembling hands. The guilt crashed over him like a wave, threatening to drown him. Grace had given him everything: a job, dignity, hope, and he'd repaid her by destroying her reputation. The woman who'd shown him nothing but kindness was now facing public shame because she dared to believe in him. Images flashed through his mind. Grace's gentle smile when she'd first offered him the job, her quiet strength when facing down critics, the pride in her eyes during the Christmas charity event. She'd treated him like family when everyone else saw only a thief. He pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, his vision blurring with tears. Maddie stirred in her sleep, making those little snuffling sounds that usually warmed his heart. But now each innocent noise felt like an accusation. What kind of father was he, running away instead of staying to fight? What lessons would Maddie learn from a man who abandoned those who helped him? "I ruin everything I touch," he whispered, his voice breaking. The words hung in the cold air of the car, a confession to no one but himself. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he rested his forehead against the steering wheel. A truck rumbled past, rocking his small car with its wake. Maddie whimpered in her sleep, and Ethan reached back to gentle pat her leg. Even in this moment of despair, his first instinct was still to comfort his daughter. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could soothe her fears, but couldn't face his own. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the frozen fields beside the highway. In the distance, Crestwood's water tower stood like a sentinel against the pale winter sky, a reminder of everything he was leaving behind. The town had offered him a second chance, and now he was throwing it away because he was too scared to stay and fight. Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks as he whispered, "I ruin everything I touch." The words tasted like defeat on his tongue, bitter and final. They were the same words he'd whispered after his wife's death, after losing his job at the auto shop, after being caught stealing diapers. They were the words of a man who'd given up on himself long before anyone else had the chance to. Lila's fingers flew across her keyboard, her coffee long cold beside her. The newsroom was empty this early, but she preferred it that way. Stacks of printed emails and security logs covered her desk like fallen leaves. Her eyes burned from staring at screens for hours, but she couldn't stop now. Not when she was this close. "Come on," she muttered, scrolling through another batch of emails. "Show me what you did, Tom." The answer came in an encrypted email chain. Tom had contacted a video editor who specialized in reputation management. The timestamps matched perfectly the day before the scandal broke. Lila's heart raced as she followed the digital breadcrumbs. More evidence emerged. Security footage access logs showing Tom downloading the original video, payment records to the editor, and finally the smoking gun, a draft email to several news outlets, scheduling the release of the edited footage. "Got you," Lila whispered, her hands shaking as she gathered the printouts. The morning sun was just touching the city skyline when she marched into Crestwood Mall. Tom's office occupied the top floor, all glass and chrome, designed to intimidate. His secretary tried to stop her, but Lila walked right past, her grandmother's determination in every step. Tom looked up from his desk, annoyed at the interruption. "Lila, what are you doing here?" She dropped the stack of papers on his desk. "Showing you what real journalism looks like." "What is this?" He picked up the top sheet, his face darkening as he read. "Evidence." Lila's phone was already recording in her pocket. "You edited that footage. You tried to destroy my grandmother's reputation and Ethan's life just to get control of the mall." Tom's laugh was cold. "Prove it. I already have." She spread out the email chains. "The editor you hired? He kept records. The security logs show you accessing the original footage. The payment trails lead right back to you." His composure cracked slightly. "You're being dramatic. I was protecting our investments. Your grandmother's bleeding heart was going to bankrupt us with all this charity nonsense. The mall's profits are up 15% since the Second Chances program started. Because of my management," Tom stood, his voice rising. "Not because of some feel-good publicity stunt hiring thieves and deadbeats." Lila's hand pressed against her phone, making sure it was still recording. "Is that what you really think of them? Of people like Ethan? People like him are parasites. They take advantage of bleeding hearts like your grandmother. She's too naive to see it, but I'm not." Tom's facade of professional calm had completely slipped. "This mall needs proper management, not some retirement project for criminals. So you manufactured a scandal, destroyed a man's reputation, forced out your own mother-in-law?" "I did what was necessary." Tom's smile was smug. "The board will vote tomorrow to transfer control to me. Then we can finally run this place like a business instead of a charity ward." Lila stood very still, letting the recording capture every word. "You really believe that, don't you? That kindness is weakness? Kindness doesn't pay bills." He gathered the papers, shoving them back at her. "Now get out before I call security." "Don't worry," Lila said, reaching for her phone. "I have everything I need." She worked through the day without stopping, fueled by coffee and righteous anger. The documentary piece she'd been working on transformed into something bigger, the full story, from beginning to end. She included the original unedited footage of Ethan's desperate act, Grace's compassion, the success of Second Chances, and finally, Tom's confession. The editing was minimal. The truth didn't need enhancement. She let the raw footage speak for itself. Ethan working late hours, helping elderly shoppers with their bags, teaching other Second Chances participants how to fix things. Grace's quiet wisdom as she built a community of healing. The real Christmas Eve celebration, full of genuine joy and redemption. Then came Tom's words, dripping with contempt, exposing the manufactured scandal for what it was, a power grab built on cruelty. The final sequence was simple, actual profit reports showing the mall's increased success under Grace's leadership, followed by testimonials from employees and community members whose lives had been changed. Lila's hands hovered over the keyboard. The upload button waited. She thought of her grandmother's words. Sometimes the truth needs more than just telling, it needs showing. With a deep breath, she pressed publish. The video went live just as the sun was setting. She titled it simply, Second Chances. The true story of grace and redemption at Crestwood Mall. Within minutes, it began to spread. Her phone buzzed with notifications as local news sites picked it up, then regional, then national. The story of a desperate father, a compassionate woman, and the truth that finally came to light captured hearts across the country. Lila sat back in her chair, exhausted but satisfied. She'd done what journalists were supposed to do, reveal truth, fight injustice, and maybe, just maybe, help goodness win. Her phone rang. It was her grandmother. "I saw it," Grace said softly. "You did good, sweetheart." Lila wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I learned from the best." "Now," Grace said, and Lila could hear the smile in her voice. "Let's go find Ethan and bring him home." The morning sun pierced through heavy clouds as Ethan sat in a small diner just outside of town, stirring a cold cup of coffee. Maddie cooed softly in her carrier beside him, playing with a worn teddy bear. The television mounted on the wall suddenly caught his attention as the morning news broadcast began. "Breaking news this morning," the anchor announced, her voice clear and urgent. "A shocking revelation about the Crestwood Mall controversy has taken social media by storm." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he watched Lila's documentary footage play across the screen. There was Tom Hanover, caught on camera, bragging about his scheme to discredit Grace and end the Second Chances program. The footage cut to interviews with program participants, veterans, single parents, and others whose lives had been transformed by Grace's compassion. His phone buzzed incessantly. Text messages and missed calls flooded in from people he hadn't heard from in weeks. The diner's other patrons began pointing at him, their expressions now warm and sympathetic rather than judgmental. "Aren't you the guy from the mall?" asked a waitress, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. "The one who helped all those people?" Ethan nodded quietly, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the cup. The waitress smiled and patted his shoulder. "It's on the house, honey. You and that sweet baby deserve some kindness today." Outside the diner, cars honked as they passed the mall. People gathered with homemade signs, "We stand with Grace," and "Second Chances save lives." Local news vans clustered in the parking lot, their cameras capturing the growing crowd. The mall's social media accounts exploded with support. People shared stories of times when Grace or Ethan had helped them, a veteran who'd found purpose through the program, an elderly woman whose groceries Ethan had carried to her car, a single mom who'd received emergency diapers when she couldn't afford them. Inside the mall, Tom Hanover faced the consequences of his actions. Security cameras captured him hurrying through the corridors, head down, as employees and customers turned their backs on him. In the main atrium, he confronted a wall of reporters. "Mr. Hanover, did you deliberately edit the footage to harm your mother-in-law's reputation? Is it true you attempted to sabotage the Second Chances program?" Tom's polished corporate facade cracked under the pressure. "No comment," he muttered, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. By noon, his resignation letter sat on the board's desk. Meanwhile, Grace sat in her small office at home, surrounded by ringing phones and overflowing email notifications. Donations poured in from across the country, small amounts from ordinary people touched by the story, larger sums from businesses wanting to support the Second Chances initiative. "Mom," Leela said, rushing in with her laptop, "you need to see this. The mall's charity account, it's received over $50,000 in just 3 hours. People want the program back. They want you back." Grace wiped tears from her eyes as she read messages of support. "It was never about me, dear. It was about showing people that kindness matters more than profit." The mall's board of directors called an emergency meeting. By early afternoon, they'd voted unanimously to reinstate Grace as honorary director. They issued a public statement. "Mrs. Hanover's vision of compassionate community service represents the very best of Crestwood Mall. We are honored to support her continued leadership." Local businesses began calling, offering job placements for Second Chances participants. The auto shop that had laid off Ethan months ago reached out, promising positions for program graduates. The mall's Christmas decorations, which had seemed dim in recent days, sparkled with renewed hope. Grace stood in the mall's center court, where just weeks ago they'd celebrated the Gifts of Grace event. Reporters gathered around her as she made a simple statement: "Kindness isn't weak, compassion isn't foolish. When we lift others up, we all rise together." But something was missing. Someone was missing. Grace returned to her office and picked up her phone. She knew exactly where to find Ethan. He'd texted her his location the night before, unable to fully sever their connection even in his despair. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed his number. The phone rang 3 times before she heard his voice, thick with emotion. "Grace, I'm so sorry. I never meant to cause all this trouble." "Hush now," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a mother's love. "It's time to come home, son." The diner fell silent as Ethan listened to Grace's words, tears falling freely down his cheeks. Maddie reached for him from her carrier, and he gathered her close, holding his daughter as the weight of shame finally lifted from his shoulders. Through the diner's windows, he could see the mall's Christmas lights glowing in the distance, no longer a reminder of his lowest moment, but a beacon calling him back where he belonged. The controversy that had threatened to destroy them had instead revealed the true heart of their community. Tom's attempt to discredit them had only proved what Grace had known all along, that sometimes the greatest acts of grace come disguised as moments of despair, and that second chances aren't just gifts we give to others, but seeds of hope we plant in our own hearts. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the highway as Ethan's old sedan crossed the Crestwood town limits. In the back seat, Maddie cooed at her stuffed elephant, blissfully unaware of the butterflies dancing in her father's stomach. As they approached the mall, his hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Almost there, sweetheart," he whispered, more to calm himself than for Maddie's benefit. The massive parking lot came into view, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Cars filled nearly every space, and people milled about near the main entrance. His first instinct was to turn around, but then he saw it. The electronic marquee above the mall entrance, its red letters scrolling. "Welcome home, Ethan and Maddie." "Oh my God," he muttered, pulling into the nearest empty spot. Before he could even turn off the engine, familiar faces appeared at his car window. There was Mike from maintenance, Sarah from the food court, and several others from the Second Chances program. Their smiles were genuine, their waves enthusiastic. Ethan's hands trembled as he unbuckled Maddie from her car seat. She was wearing her best dress, a tiny pink thing with white polka dots that Grace had given her for Christmas. As he lifted her into his arms, the crowd parted, and there stood Grace Hanover, her silver hair catching the morning light. "Welcome home," she said simply, opening her arms. Ethan walked toward her, fighting back tears. When she wrapped him in a tight hug, careful not to squish Maddie between them, something broke inside him. All the fear, all the shame, all the running. "You didn't steal that day," Grace whispered in his ear, her voice thick with emotion. "You were giving us all a chance to be better." Maddie reached out and patted Grace's cheek, making the older woman laugh through her tears. The sound drew others closer. Mall employees, regular customers, and faces Ethan recognized from his viral story. Lila appeared with her camera, but for once, Ethan didn't mind being filmed. This was a moment worth capturing. She gave him a quick side hug and tickled Maddie's chin. "The community's response has been overwhelming," she told him. "The Second Chances Fund has enough donations to run for 2 years." Inside the mall, holiday decorations still sparkled everywhere. A massive Christmas tree dominated the central courtyard. Though its lights were dark in the morning Sunday, shoppers paused to applaud as their group passed, some reaching out to shake Ethan's hand or touch Maddie's tiny fingers. Grace led them to her office, now restored to its former warmth. On her desk sat a framed photo of Ethan giving his Christmas Eve speech next to one of her late husband. "We have something to ask you," Grace said, settling into her chair while Lila perched on the desk edge. "We want you to be more than just an employee here." Ethan shifted Maddie in his arms, uncertain. "What do you mean?" "We want you to run the Second Chances program," Lila explained, "as operations manager. Full benefits, including childcare for Maddie." I don't know what to say," Ethan stammered. "Say yes," Grace smiled. "You've lived it. You understand it. Who better to help others find their way back?" Maddie chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, making them all laugh. Ethan looked down at his daughter's innocent face, then at Grace's hopeful one, and finally at Lila's encouraging smile. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I'll do it." They spent the next hour showing him his new office, a modest but bright space near Grace's, with a small attached room perfect for a baby playpen. The maintenance staff had painted it during his absence, adding cheerful yellow walls and hanging pictures of the mall's success stories. As evening approached, Grace gathered everyone in the central courtyard. The massive Christmas tree towered above them, its unlit branches still festooned with ornaments and tinsel. The mall's regular closing time had passed, but nobody had left. "Before we take down the decorations tomorrow," Grace announced to the crowd, "we have one last lighting, one last celebration of hope." She handed Ethan a small remote control. "Would you do the honors?" Ethan looked at the remote, then at the faces around him. Grace's wisdom, Lila's determination, his coworkers' acceptance, and most importantly, Maddie's innocent joy. 6 months ago, he'd walked into this mall, a broken man. Now, he stood here whole, surrounded by a family he never expected to find. He pressed the button. The massive tree blazed to life, thousands of tiny lights twinkling like earthbound stars. The mall erupted in cheers, the sound echoing off the glass ceiling and marble floors. Maddie reached toward the lights, her face glowing with wonder. The cheers grew louder, filled with genuine joy and celebration. In that moment, under the sparkling Christmas tree, Ethan finally understood what Grace had been trying to teach him all along. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't the help you receive, but the chance to help others in return. The mall erupted in cheers as the Christmas tree lights up one final time that season. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Crestwood Mall, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Ethan Miller adjusted his tie, still not quite used to wearing one, and walked through the bustling corridors. Workers nodded and smiled as he passed, no longer whispering or averting their eyes. The diaper thief label had long since faded, replaced by something he never expected: respect. Inside his new office, the words "Operations Manager" freshly painted on the door. Ethan reviewed applications for the expanding Second Chances program. Each form told a story he knew too well. Veterans struggling to find their place, single parents desperate for work, people who just needed someone to believe in them. Morning Boss called Jimmy, a former Marine who joined the program 2 months ago. He wheeled his cleaning cart past the door. Got those light fixtures in the East Wing fixed like you asked. Thanks, Jimmy. How's the night school going? Almost done with my electrician certification. Jimmy beamed. Never thought I'd be studying again at 45. Ethan smiled, remembering his own journey. Grace always says it's never too late for a fresh start. Speaking of Grace, the mall owner's gentle humming drifted down the hallway. She appeared in his doorway, carrying a newspaper and wearing that knowing smile that had changed his life that winter day. Have you seen this? She laid the paper on his desk. The headline read, Second Chances Program to Launch in 5 New Locations. Below was a photo of their team Ethan, Grace, and Lila standing proudly in front of Crestwood Mall. Still feels like a dream sometimes, Ethan admitted, running his fingers over the newsprint. Dreams come true when good people refuse to give up, Grace said, settling into the chair across from him. Which reminds me, Lila's documentary won that regional journalism award she was nominated for. Ethan remembered the film premiere last month. Watching his story unfold on screen had been surreal, from his desperate attempt to steal diapers to his current position, helping others rebuild their lives. The audience had cried, cheered, and ultimately stood to applaud not just him, but every person who'd found hope through the program. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Martha, a grandmother they'd hired as a customer service representative, poked her head in. Mr. Miller, the team from Cedar Rapids is here for their training. Ethan gathered his materials. The program's expansion meant teaching other malls how to implement their model of compassionate employment. It was work that filled him with purpose. In the conference room, faces both eager and uncertain looked back at him. He recognized that look he'd worn it himself not so long ago. Welcome to Crestwood, he began, his voice steady and warm. I know what it's like to think you're out of chances, but you're not here because we pity you. You're here because we believe in what you can become. As he shared the program's success stories, Lila slipped into the back of the room with her camera. She'd been documenting the program's growth for a follow-up piece. Her initial skepticism had transformed into fierce advocacy for second chances. During the lunch break, Ethan found a quiet moment to call the daycare where Maddie spent her mornings. His daughter was thriving, babbling her first words, taking wobbly steps. He could afford good care for her now, could buy diapers without counting pennies. Back in his office that afternoon, he reviewed the budget reports for the new locations. A photo on his desk caught his eye. Grace holding Maddie at the Christmas party, while Lila captured the moment on camera. The mall's holiday lights twinkled in the background, and his team stood around them, grinning like family. The photo reminded him of everything they'd built together. The Second Chances program had placed over 100 people in steady jobs. Their success rate was remarkable, 90% retention after 6 months. Other malls were taking notice, calling to learn their secrets. There's no secret, Grace would tell them. Just treat people with dignity and watch them rise to meet your faith in them. Ethan's desk phone buzzed. His assistant reminded him about the afternoon's video conference with state officials interested in expanding the program even further. Before logging in, he straightened his tie again and touched the photo frame gently. In the image, Maddie's laugh seemed to sparkle brighter than the Christmas lights. Grace's eyes held that same warmth that had saved him on his darkest day. His team people, who'd once been strangers, united by struggle, now stood tall and proud, wearing their mall uniforms like badges of honor. He sat back in his chair, taking in the scene captured in that frame. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof that compassion could transform lives, that sometimes the lowest moments could lead to the highest purpose. That grace, when given freely, had the power to heal not just one person, but an entire community. The video conference light blinked, ready to connect him with people eager to learn about second chances. Ethan touched the frame one last time, grateful for his own second chance and ready to help others find theirs. The aroma of pot roast and fresh-baked rolls wafted through Grace's modest 2-story home as she opened the door, the scents immediately enveloping Ethan in warmth and memories of better times. He stood on her porch, holding Maddie in one arm and a bouquet of daisies in the other, their white petals still dotted with morning dew from the grocery store's refrigerated case. The baby wore a tiny pink dress with white shoes that Ethan had splurged on from the clearance rack, her dark curls neatly combed and secured with a miniature bow that kept slipping to one side. "These are for you," Ethan said, offering the flowers with a shy smile that didn't quite hide his nervousness. He'd spent 20 minutes in the floral section, counting and recounting his remaining grocery money before settling on the modest bouquet. I remember you mentioning daisies were your favorite during our first conversation in your office. Grace's eyes lit up like Christmas morning, her weathered hands reaching for the simple flowers, as if they were the most precious gift she'd ever received. Oh, how thoughtful. Come in, come in. She took the flowers and breathed in their fresh scent, leading them through her living room, where family photos lined the walls in mismatched frames, decades of memories captured in fading colors and sepia tones. Wedding photos, graduations, birthdays, and candid moments of joy filled every available surface. Lila's already in the kitchen, trying to steal bites of the rolls when she thinks I'm not looking. Lila's voice carried from the kitchen, warm with laughter and mock indignation. I heard that, Grandma, and for the record, I was just checking to make sure they were cooling properly. The kitchen was warm and inviting, a symphony of yellow curtains framing windows that overlooked Grace's carefully tended garden, and well-worn cookbooks stacked on open shelves like old friends. The spine showed years of use, some held together with tape, others bookmarked with index cards covered in Grace's neat handwriting. The round oak table dominated the center of the room, set with Grace's best china, the delicate rose pattern she usually saved for holidays and special occasions. Each piece had been carefully placed, the crystal glasses catching the afternoon light and casting tiny rainbows across the tablecloth. Here, let me hold this little angel while you get settled, Grace said, reaching for Maddie with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades caring for children. The baby went to her willingly, immediately fascinated by Grace's pearl necklace, a simple strand that had been Howard's wedding gift 43 years ago. Maddie's tiny fingers reached for the lustrous beads, her eyes wide with wonder. Ethan watched as Grace bounced Maddie gently, humming an old lullaby in a voice still sweet despite its years. The scene stirred something deep in his chest, a familiar ache, but softer now, like an old wound that had finally begun to heal properly. It reminded him of how Sarah used to dream about Sunday dinners with their growing family, how she'd sketch out seating arrangements on napkins and plan menus for holidays they'd never see together. The memory no longer felt like a knife twist. Instead, it warmed him with gratitude for what they'd shared, however brief. The table was my Howard's pride and joy, Grace said, running her free hand along the smooth wood surface, her fingers tracing the grain with reverent familiarity. He refinished it himself after we found it at a garage sale, buried under years of neglect and multiple coats of ugly paint. Spent weeks getting it just right, sanding and staining until it gleamed like new. Lila helped her grandmother settle Maddie into a borrowed high chair that had been retrieved from the basement, its cheerful pattern of dancing bears still bright despite its age. Grandpa could fix anything with his hands, she said, adjusting the tray with practiced movements. Remember how he used to say a little patience and sandpaper could solve most problems in life? That's where I learned it from, Grace said, checking the roast in the oven with the careful attention of someone who had perfected the art of Sunday dinner over decades. The meat surface was beautifully browned, surrounded by vegetables that had been cooking slowly in the savory juices. Though sometimes I think he was talking about more than just furniture when he said that. They gathered around the table, passing dishes family style, with the easy rhythm of people who understood that sharing a meal was about more than just food. The pot roast was fork tender, falling apart at the slightest touch, surrounded by carrots and potatoes that had soaked up the rich, herb-infused gravy. Fresh rolls steamed when broken open, releasing pockets of warm air that carried the scent of yeast and butter. A garden salad picked fresh from Grace's backyard that morning added bright splashes of red tomatoes and green lettuce to their plates. "This is absolutely amazing," Ethan said after his first bite, the flavors bringing back memories of his childhood, of his mother's kitchen before life got complicated and meals became hurried affairs eaten, standing up or from takeout containers. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since." He trailed off, but Grace understood, her gentle nod encouraging him to continue or leave the thought unfinished as he chose. "Well, you're always welcome here anytime," she said firmly, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who meant every word. "Both of you. This table has room for anyone who needs a place to belong." Maddie squealed in delighted agreement, enthusiastically mashing potatoes between her tiny fingers and somehow managing to get more food on her face than in her mouth. Her joy was infectious, drawing chuckles from all three adults as they watched her discover the texture and taste of real food. "Speaking of welcome," Lila said, pausing to wipe a streak of potato from Maddie's cheek with maternal instincts she didn't know she possessed. "The response to the expanded Second Chances program has been absolutely incredible. 3 more malls in the state want to implement it, and we've had inquiries from as far away as Ohio and Tennessee. Grace beamed at Ethan with the pride of someone watching her faith in humanity vindicated. And it all started with one person choosing to see beyond appearances, to look at the heart instead of the circumstances. "I still can't believe how things turned out," Ethan admitted, his voice thick with emotion that he no longer tried to hide. "That day in the mall, when I was standing there with those diapers in my hands, I was so sure my life was over. I thought I'd hit rock bottom and there was nowhere left to fall." Howard used to say something about moments like that, Grace said, her eyes growing distant with memory, seeing her late husband as clearly as if he were sitting in his usual chair at the head of the table. He'd say, "Real wealth isn't what you keep in your pockets or your bank account, it's what you give away when you have nothing left to give." She smiled at Ethan, her expression warm with understanding. "He learned that lesson in Vietnam, you know," said the poorest villages he encountered often shared the most generously, offering their last bowl of rice to soldiers who looked hungry. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding flowing through him like warm honey, connecting dots he'd never seen before. "That's exactly what you did for me that day. You gave me dignity and hope when you had every reason not to, when the whole world expected you to call the police and wash your hands of the problem. And just look at what grew from that one seed of compassion," Leela added, gesturing at Ethan's new business cards, which read, Operations Manager, Second Chances Initiative in simple, professional lettering that still made his chest swell with quiet pride. They lingered over dessert, homemade apple pie, with vanilla ice cream that Grace had churned herself that morning, sharing stories and laughter as the afternoon light began its slow journey toward evening. Maddie dozed contentedly in her high chair, belly full and completely secure in the love that surrounded her. The golden afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting warm shadows across the familiar furniture and well-loved walls that had witnessed countless family gatherings over the years. Grace told them about her early teaching days, about the challenges of reaching students who came to school hungry or angry, about Howard's quiet strength that never needed to announce itself to be felt by everyone around him. She shared the lessons life had taught her about the difference between judgment and discernment, about mercy and justice, about how sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply believing they're worth saving. Ethan shared funny stories about Maddie's first attempts at crawling, how she discovered she could scoot backward but couldn't figure out forward motion, leaving her frustrated and stuck under furniture. He talked about the way she laughed at everything, how her joy was so pure and infectious that it could lift his spirits even on his darkest days. Lila talked about the hundreds of letters she'd received from viewers touched by her documentary. Stories of kindness inspired by Ethan and Grace's example, teachers buying supplies for students with their own money, neighbors helping with groceries, employers giving second chances to people with difficult pasts. The ripple effects seemed to spread endlessly outward, touching lives they'd never meet. As the evening drew to a close, they helped Grace clear the table and pack generous portions of leftover pot roast for Ethan to take home. The kitchen slowly returned to its usual tidy state, dishes washed and dried with the careful attention of people who understood that taking care of things was another form of love. Leftovers were carefully wrapped in foil and labeled in Grace's neat handwriting. Ethan gathered a sleeping Maddie from her high chair, cradling her against his shoulder with the gentle confidence of a father who had learned to do everything one-handed. "Thank you for this," he said softly to Grace, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking his daughter. "For the meal, for the company, for everything you've done for us." "You've given me just as much," Grace replied, touching his arm with the light pressure of someone who understood that sometimes the smallest gestures carried the most meaning. "You helped me remember why Howard and I always believed in second chances, why we never gave up on people even when they'd given up on themselves." Lila hugged her grandmother goodbye, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and flower that always clung to Grace's clothes, then joined Ethan on the porch. The evening air was cool and sweet with the scent of Grace's garden, roses and jasmine, releasing their perfume into the twilight, fireflies beginning their nightly dance among the bushes. From her doorway, Grace watched them walk to their cars, Ethan moving carefully to avoid waking Maddie, Lila carrying the container of leftovers, and the promise of more Sunday dinners to come. The porch light cast a warm circle around them, and Grace felt her heart swell with the particular joy that comes from seeing broken things mended, lost things found. "He's finally found his true purpose," Grace whispered to the evening air, joy and pride mingling in her voice as she watched them drive away, their taillights disappearing around the corner, but the warmth of their presence lingering like the last notes of a beautiful song. The winter sun cast long shadows through Crestwood Mall's glass ceiling, painting stripes of light across the polished floors that gleamed like ribbons of gold and silver. Ethan Miller stood in his office, a modest space that had once been a storage closet but now felt like a palace to him. He ran his fingers along the nameplate that read, Operations Manager, Second Chances Program, still amazed after all these months that those words belonged to him. The brass gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a daily reminder of how far he'd traveled from that desperate night when he'd tried to steal diapers for his baby girl. His security phone buzzed against the wooden desk Grace had found for him at a thrift store. The message made his heart skip. Possible shoplifting at Wilson's Pharmacy, the very store where his own story had begun exactly 1 year ago. His breath caught in his throat as memories flooded back. The harsh fluorescent lights, the humiliation burning in his cheeks, the weight of Maddie's hungry cries echoing in his mind. He grabbed his jacket, a warm winter coat that Grace had insisted on buying him when the temperatures dropped. His footsteps echoed in the quiet morning mall, past the coffee shop where the Second Chances employees often gathered before their shifts, past the toy store where Maddie loved to press her tiny hands against the window display. Through Wilson's Pharmacy's large front window, he spotted a young woman, maybe mid-20s, standing near the baby formula display. She clutched a can of formula to her chest like it was made of precious metal. Her coat was worn thin at the elbows and sleeves, clearly a hand-me-down that had seen better years. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, the kind that came from sleepless nights spent worrying about bills and empty cupboards. Her stringy brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her jeans had small holes near the knees. Mike, the store's security guard, approached her with measured steps. The woman's eyes darted between the exits like a cornered animal. Ethan quickened his pace, his heart pounding as he recognized the same desperate fear that had consumed him that terrible night. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," Mike was saying in his firm but not unkind voice as Ethan pushed through the glass door. The familiar scent of the pharmacy, antiseptic mixed with the faint sweetness of children's medicine, brought back a rush of memories. "Wait," Ethan called out, his voice gentle but carrying the authority that came with his position. The woman's eyes darted between them, wide and filled with the same desperate fear he remembered seeing in his own reflection in store windows. "I'll handle this, Mike." Mike nodded, recognizing Ethan's voice, and stepping back with visible relief. The woman's hands trembled so hard the formula can rattled softly against her chest. She looked ready to bolt at any second. "I'm Ethan Miller," he said softly, deliberately keeping several feet of distance between them so she wouldn't feel trapped. His voice carried the same gentle tone Grace had used with him during his darkest moments. "Would you like to sit down and talk?" She shook her head quickly, tears welling up in her brown eyes. "I can't, my baby. He's hungry, and I lost my job last month, and the food stamps haven't come through yet." Her words tumbled out in a desperate rush, each one carrying the weight of sleepless nights and empty bottles. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, pulling out his worn leather wallet, the same one he'd carried when he had nothing in it but lint and expired coupons. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pharmacy's gentle background music. "Sarah Martinez. And your baby?" "Tommy. He's 4 months old." Her voice cracked like glass, and Ethan could hear in those words every feeding she'd had to stretch, every night she'd worried whether she could provide. "I've never stolen anything before, I swear. I didn't know what else to do." Ethan walked slowly to the counter, maintaining gentle eye contact with Sarah. The elderly cashier, Mrs. Chen, had been watching the scene unfold with concerned eyes behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "I'd like to pay for that formula," he told her, handing over his credit card, a simple plastic rectangle that now represented stability instead of maxed-out limits and declined transactions. Sarah's eyes widened with shock. "I can't accept—" "Yes, you can," Ethan said firmly but kindly, the same way Grace had spoken to him when she'd insisted on paying for those diapers. "Because exactly 1 year ago, I stood right here in this same store, trying to steal diapers for my daughter." The tension in Sarah's shoulders eased slightly, like a rubber band slowly releasing. "What happened to you?" Ethan smiled, feeling Grace's presence in his words, even though she was probably at home tending to her morning garden. "Someone showed me that mistakes don't define us. They just show us where we need help." He took the paid-for formula from Mrs. Chen and handed it to Sarah with both hands, like passing along something sacred. And sometimes, help comes from people who've walked the same path. Sarah clutched the can to her chest, tears flowing freely now, leaving clean tracks down her dusty cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you." "Actually," Ethan said, reaching into his jacket pocket for one of the business cards Grace had helped him design, I might have something better than thanks. How would you feel about a job? Her eyes widened until he could see the whites all around her brown irises. A job? But who would hire me after? She gestured helplessly at the formula, at herself, at the mess her life had become. The Second Chances program would. We're always looking for dedicated parents who want to work hard and rebuild their lives. He gestured around the mall with the same pride Grace had shown when first explaining her vision. This place gave me a fresh start when I needed it most. Now I help run the program that helps others do the same thing. Sarah stared at the card as if it might disappear if she blinked. The simple white rectangle bore the mall's logo and the words that had changed Ethan's life. Second Chances Program. Because everyone deserves another opportunity. Is it real? This isn't some kind of trick? Her voice carried the wariness of someone who'd learned that good things usually came with hidden costs. Ethan shook his head, pulling out his phone to show her the photos he kept there. Pictures of the program's current employees at their workstations, at the company picnic Grace had organized, at the small graduation ceremony they held whenever someone completed their probationary period. No tricks, just people helping people. The photos showed veterans, single parents, former addicts, and others who'd found their way back through honest work and steady paychecks. We offer flexible schedules for parents, on-site childcare, and fair wages. All we ask is commitment and honesty. Sarah's hands shook as she took the card, studying every word printed on it. I used to be a receptionist, she said quietly, her voice carrying the ghost of better days. Before Tommy, before everything fell apart. I was good at organizing things, answering phones, managing schedules. We could use someone with office experience, Ethan said warmly, feeling the same excitement Grace must have felt when she'd first envisioned this program. Would you like to see the childcare center? It's where my daughter Maddie spent her days while I got back on my feet. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with her coat sleeve. As they walked through the mall, past the fountain where children tossed pennies and made wishes, Ethan pointed out the various stores where program participants worked. He shared their stories of redemption. Maria, who'd lost her job due to a felony conviction but now managed the bookstore. James, a veteran with PTSD who'd become the mall's head of maintenance. Jennifer, a former addict who ran the small cafe with infectious enthusiasm. At the bright yellow door of the daycare center, Sarah peered through the large window at the cheerful room filled with playing children. Finger paintings covered one wall in a rainbow of colors, and soft play areas were scattered throughout the space. Two caregivers moved among the children with patient smiles, and the sound of laughter drifted through the glass. And Tommy could stay here while I work? Sarah's voice held wonder, as if she'd never imagined such a possibility. Right where you can visit him on breaks, Ethan confirmed, remembering how many lunch hours he'd spent in that same room, watching Maddie take her first steps on the soft carpet. We understand that being a parent comes first. It always comes first. They settled into the small interview room adjacent to Ethan's office, where a small table held tissues, water bottles, and the same sense of hope that Grace had cultivated throughout the mall. Sarah slowly shared her story. An unexpected pregnancy with a boyfriend who'd seemed supportive until reality set in, medical bills that had drained her modest savings, a partner who'd left one morning without even a note, the same cascade of misfortune that had brought Ethan to his knees that terrible winter night. When can I start? She asked, her voice stronger now, carrying notes of determination instead of desperation. How about Monday morning? Ethan smiled, pulling out the paperwork that Grace had insisted be written in simple, encouraging language. We'll start you part-time, see how it fits with Tommy's schedule. The pay isn't a fortune, but it's honest work with room to grow, full benefits after 90 days, and all the support you need to rebuild. As Sarah filled out the forms, Ethan noticed her hands had stopped shaking. The desperate, hunted look in her eyes had been replaced by something he recognized from his own mirror during those early days. The first glimmer of hope, fragile but real. When they finished the paperwork, Ethan walked her through the mall toward the main entrance, past the directory where the Second Chances program now had its own prominent listing. Sarah hugged the formula to her chest, but her posture was different now. Straighter, more confident, like someone who'd remembered she had value. Mr. Miller, she said, turning back just before reaching the glass doors. Why did you help me? You could have called the police. Let them handle it. Why risk your job for a stranger? Ethan thought of Grace, sitting in her garden that first morning after she'd hired him, explaining that kindness wasn't a risk, but an investment in humanity. He thought of all the lives that had been changed by one moment of compassion in this very mall. Because everyone deserves a second chance, he said, feeling Grace's wisdom flow through his words. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that. Someone who's been where we are and knows the way back. He watched Sarah walk toward the exit, her steps lighter than when she'd entered, no longer the desperate shuffle of someone with nowhere to go. The morning sun caught her face as she pushed open the glass door, and Ethan saw the same look of renewed purpose that had transformed his own reflection 1 year ago. "Now it's your second chance," he whispered to the empty mall corridor, remembering how those words had changed everything. Not just for him, but for everyone who'd walked through these doors since then. The morning sun streamed through the expansive glass roof of Crestwood Mall's central courtyard, casting intricate diamond patterns across the polished marble floor. The light danced and shifted as wispy clouds passed overhead, creating a natural kaleidoscope that transformed the space into something almost cathedral-like. Near the fountain, where crystal-clear water trickled in gentle cascades over smooth riverstones, Ethan Miller held his daughter Maddie's tiny hands with the tender reverence of a man who had learned to treasure every precious moment. The toddler's pink dress, dotted with tiny white flowers that Grace had picked out during their last shopping trip together, swayed gently as she took wobbly steps along the fountain's smooth limestone edge. Her chubby legs, still uncertain but growing stronger each day, trembled with each careful step. Yet her cherubic face beamed with the fierce determination that reminded Ethan so much of her mother, the same stubborn courage that had seen Sarah through military life before she'd given everything to bring Maddie into the world. "That's it, sweetheart. Nice and slow," Ethan encouraged, his voice soft and patient, carrying none of the strain that had once marked his every word. "You're doing so good, princess. Daddy's right here with you." Maddie's dark curls, so much like Sarah's, caught the morning light as she concentrated intensely on each movement, her little tongue poking out slightly in the universal expression of childhood focus. On a nearby bench, positioned perfectly to catch both the warmth of the sun and the best view of the father-daughter duo, Grace Hanover sat with her granddaughter Lila. Both women watched the scene with tender smiles that spoke of shared understanding and deep affection. Though Grace's silver hair had grown whiter and her movements had become slower over the past year, a reminder that time waited for no one, her eyes still sparkled with the same boundless kindness that had changed so many lives within these very walls. The bench where they sat had become something of a landmark in the mall. Regular shoppers knew to look for Grace there most mornings, ready with a kind word, a listening ear, or practical help for anyone who needed it. Local teenagers had nicknamed it Grace's Corner, and more than one troubled soul had found themselves inexplicably drawn to sit beside the gentlewoman who seemed to radiate peace. "Look at her go," Lila said, squeezing her grandmother's weathered hand with gentle pressure. The touch conveyed years of gratitude for lessons learned and wisdom shared. "Hard to believe she was just a baby when we first met Ethan. Barely 6 months old and so tiny I was afraid to hold her." Grace nodded slowly, adjusting the soft lavender shawl around her shoulders, the same one Harold had given her for their last anniversary together. "Time has a way of healing what we think is broken beyond repair," she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "But it requires patience and faith and people willing to stand in the gap when someone can't stand on their own." Maddie squealed with pure delight as she conquered another step, her little fingers gripping her father's calloused hands with complete trust. Those hands had once trembled with shame and desperation as they reached for a pack of diapers he couldn't afford. Now they were steady and sure, offering support without taking away her independence, a perfect metaphor for the man Ethan had become. His maintenance uniform had long since been replaced by a crisp navy button-down shirt and khaki pants, clothes that reflected his new position, but more importantly, his restored sense of dignity. The operations manager badge pinned to his chest caught the morning light, but it was the confidence in his posture and the peace in his expression that truly marked his transformation. "Remember when you could barely look anyone in the eye?" Grace called out to him, her voice warm with affection and just a hint of playful teasing. "Now look at you teaching others how to walk tall, helping them find their own second chances." Ethan's cheeks flushed at the memory, but it was no longer the burning shame of before. Instead, it was the gentle embarrassment of a man who still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. He glanced around the bustling mall, taking in the colorful Second Chances banner hanging proudly over the information desk. At the veterans and single parents who now worked alongside him with the same dignity he'd fought to reclaim. At the place that had witnessed both his lowest moment and his greatest triumph. The mall had changed too, in ways both subtle and profound. There was an energy here now, a sense of purpose that went beyond commerce. The Second Chances program had become the heartbeat of Crestwood Mall, drawing visitors from neighboring towns who wanted to see what grace in action looked like. Local news stations regularly featured stories about the transformed lives, and social media buzzed with posts about the Miracle Mall, where compassion trumped judgment. "I still can't believe how much has changed," Ethan admitted, his voice thick with emotion as he carefully guided Maddie through a particularly challenging turn around the fountain's corner. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream, that I'll open my eyes and still be sitting in that awful apartment, wondering how I was going to buy her next meal. The best dreams are the ones we make real," Grace replied, her voice carrying the wisdom of years spent watching broken things become beautiful again. "You did that yourself, Ethan. Every choice you made after that first day, every time you chose to try again instead of giving up, that's what built this new life. You just needed someone to remind you it was possible." Lila pulled out her phone, her journalist's instincts still strong, even in these quiet family moments. She began capturing photos of Maddie's milestone moment, knowing that someday these images would be treasures beyond price. The little girl's laughter echoed through the soaring atrium, a sound so pure and joyful that it drew smiles from passing shoppers who recognized the family that had become local legends. The morning crowd was beginning to gather, the regular mall walkers who came for exercise and community, the shop owners opening their stores, the other Second Chances employees arriving for their shifts. Each person who passed offered waves or words of encouragement, creating a circle of support that still amazed Ethan with its consistency and warmth. "Daddy, look!" Maddie exclaimed, her voice bright with triumph as she managed 3 whole steps without wobbling. Her dark curls bounced with excitement, and her face glowed with the satisfaction of a goal accomplished. "I did it! I did it all by myself!" "I see you, princess," Ethan beamed, his heart swelling with a pride so intense it almost took his breath away. "You're getting so strong and brave. Mommy would be so proud of you." Here, in this very spot where he'd once stood in shame with security cameras rolling and his world falling apart, his daughter was learning to walk. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. It felt like a message from Sarah herself, a reminder that endings could become beginnings in the most unexpected ways. Grace slowly rose from the bench, her movements careful but determined. Her arms stretched out in welcome, and her face lit up with the special smile she reserved for Maddie, the expression of a woman who had never had grandchildren of her own, but had found that love could create family bonds stronger than blood. "Come to Grandma Grace, sweetheart," she called softly, her voice carrying across the space like a gentle invitation to something wonderful. "Show me how well you can walk now." Maddie's face lit up at the invitation, her whole body practically vibrating with excitement. She had claimed Grace as her grandmother from almost their first meeting, with the effortless acceptance that only children possess. With determined focus that belied her young age, she began moving toward Grace's waiting embrace, one careful step at a time. Each movement was deliberate and considered, showing the careful balance between courage and caution that would serve her well in life. Ethan held her hands loosely now, ready to catch her if she stumbled, but trusting her to find her own balance. It was a delicate dance they'd perfected over months of practice, offering support without taking away independence, being present without being controlling. The metaphor for his own journey wasn't lost on him. Grace had done the same thing, giving him the safety net he needed while allowing him the dignity of standing on his own. "You know," Grace said as they waited for Maddie's careful approach, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the peaceful morning air, "when my Harold passed, I thought my purpose had died with him. I couldn't imagine what God could possibly want with an old teacher whose best days seemed to be behind her. But God has a way of turning our endings into someone else's beginning." Lila lowered her phone for a moment, watching her grandmother with eyes that had grown misty with understanding and admiration. She learned so much about strength from this woman, not the loud, demanding kind, but the quiet, persistent strength that moved mountains one pebble at a time. "You turned this whole mall into a sanctuary, Gran, a place where people come not just to shop, but to find hope." "We all did," Grace corrected her gently, her eyes never leaving Maddie's determined progress. "Every person who chose kindness over judgment, every second chance that sparked a third and fourth, we built this together. Every customer who smiled instead of stared, every employee who offered help instead of suspicion, every story shared instead of hidden away. This isn't my miracle, dear one. It belongs to all of us." Maddie was halfway to Grace now, her steps growing more confident with each small victory. The morning sunlight streamed stronger through the glass ceiling, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that surrounded them in golden warmth. The fountain's gentle splash provided a peaceful backdrop to their morning ritual, mixing with the distant sounds of the mall coming to life, cash registers chirping, conversation humming, the everyday symphony of community. "I used to hate this place," Ethan admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of complete honesty. "After that day with the diapers, I couldn't walk past the mall without feeling like I was going to be sick. The shame was so heavy I thought it might crush me. Now—" He paused, looking around at the familiar faces of his staff clustered near the information desk, at the elderly couples doing their morning mall walking routine, at the new second chances, recruits learning their duties with the same mixture of gratitude and determination he remembered so well. "Now it feels like home, the truest home I've ever known." Grace's eyes crinkled with joy as Maddie drew closer, each step bringing them nearer to this moment of triumph. "That's because it is home, Ethan. Not just the building with its stores and corridors, but what it represents: hope where there was despair, redemption where there was condemnation, community where there was isolation. These are the things money can't buy, but grace provides freely to anyone willing to receive it." The atmosphere around them seemed charged with significance, as if the morning itself understood the importance of this moment. Other mall employees had begun to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by the same sense of witnessing something precious. Even the security guard who had once arrested Ethan now watched with a gentle smile, having become one of his strongest supporters and closest friends. They watched with collective breath held as Maddie took her final steps toward Grace. Just before reaching her destination, the toddler's confidence wavered slightly, and she stumbled on the smooth floor. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed she might fall. But before anyone could react, she caught herself with a determination that was purely her own, straightened her little shoulders, and pressed forward with renewed resolve, absolutely determined to reach her goal. The moment perfectly mirrored her father's journey, Lila thought, raising her phone again to capture the symbolic beauty of it all. The same resilience in the face of obstacles, the same quiet dignity when things got difficult, the same refusal to let a stumble become a surrender. She could already see the article she would write about this moment, not for publication, but for Maddie to read someday when she was old enough to understand the legacy of courage she'd inherited. As Maddie finally reached Grace's waiting arms, her face radiant with accomplishment and joy, the elderly woman scooped her up with surprising strength. Her movements were careful but sure, cradling the child against her heart with the tenderness of someone who understood that some moments were sacred. She peppered Maddie's cheeks with soft kisses, each one a celebration of this milestone and a blessing for all the steps yet to come. "I did it, Grandma Grace. I walked all by myself," Maddie announced, her voice filled with the pure satisfaction of a goal achieved through her own effort. "Yes, you did, my precious girl," Grace murmured against her curls. "You walked all by yourself, just like your daddy learned to do. Just like all of us learn to do when we remember we're not really alone." The toddler's delighted giggles mixed with the gentle splash of the fountain and the soft murmur of mall activity beginning for the day. The sound created a melody of contentment that seemed to wrap around them all, an audible reminder of how far they'd all traveled from that dark evening when desperation had driven a good man to make a terrible choice. Ethan stood back, watching his daughter being cuddled by the woman who had saved them both, not with money or grand gestures, but with the simple, radical act of seeing his humanity when everyone else saw only his mistake. The morning sunlight continued streaming through the glass roof, casting everything in a warm, almost holy glow that made the whole scene look like something from a beautiful dream. In that perfect moment, all the struggles and triumphs of the past year seemed to crystallize into something both profound and beautifully simple. The nights of worry, the days of doubt, the slow rebuilding of trust and self-worth, it had all led to this. His daughter taking her first independent steps in the same place where he had learned to walk tall again. Grace held Maddie close, her eyes meeting Ethan's across the short distance between them. In her gaze was everything they'd shared, the risks she'd taken, the faith she'd shown, the transformation they'd witnessed together. Her voice was soft but crystal clear as she spoke the words that summed up everything they'd learned, everything they'd become. "Sometimes you have to lose everything before you remember how to give." The words hung in the air like a benediction, a truth that had been written in their hearts through experience but was only now finding voice. Around them, the mall continued its gentle awakening, but for this small family of choice, time seemed suspended in a moment of perfect grace, where redemption wore a child's bright smile and hope walked on tiny, determined feet. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Miller, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.